Hey everyone, Josh Peck here. Something important has come up that I would like to talk to you about briefly. As some of you already know, my son Nathan was diagnosed with leukemia at the age of 5. Back then, right when it happened, my very good friends, Hear the Watchman's very own, Mike Kerr and Jeannie Moore, wasted no time and began raising funds for us because they knew we were likely in for a long and expensive road ahead. Well, they were absolutely right. But because of their fast action and the generosity of everyone who prayed and supported us, Nathan was able to go into total remission a few years later. Praise God. Well, he is now 11 years old, and as of about 2 weeks ago from the time of this recording, his leukemia symptoms returned. We took him to a doctor who took one look at him and told us it was leukemia. His symptoms became so severe that we had to rush him into the hospital as he was basically at death's door. Thankfully, they were able to take him in immediately and start running tests. At this time, my wife Christina and I used social media to tell everyone what had happened and to ask for prayer. After that, the hospital began to run a number of tests, and something miraculous happened. They actually couldn't find any sign of cancer anymore. Now, we of course were overjoyed and took to social media to spread the news. However, while that was definitely a cause for celebration, we weren't out of the woods yet. Nathan still had a mystery illness that the doctors couldn't explain. Not only were they baffled by the lack of cancer, which I attest is a miraculous and direct answer to prayer, but they were also confused by his other symptoms that are still present. At the time of this recording, Nathan is still in the hospital going through multiple daily tests and surgeries to try to figure out what is going on with him. While we're incredibly thankful that, at least for now, there doesn't seem to be any cancer, we are still aware of the fact that he is still hurting, he is still sick, and we still don't have all the answers. While we really want to focus on Nathan solely, we unfortunately also have to be aware of the fact that the longer he's in the hospital and the more tests they have to run, the more expensive this will be. And our bank account is unlikely to hold out if we're on our own. Obviously, the most important thing you can do is pray. Pray for Nathan's health and for the continued wisdom and guidance of the hospital staff treating him. Also, keep Christina and I in prayer because, as you can imagine, this is a very worrying, troubling, and stressful time for our whole family, Nathan's brother and 3 sisters included. If you would like to donate financially, you can do so at givesendgo.com/NathanTheBrave. You can also go to paypal.me/JoshPeckDisclosure. Or you can send in your donation to P.O. Box 270123, Oklahoma City, Oklahoma 73137. I have to be honest, I really don't like asking for money, and I don't like that our system is set up this way, but at the same time, this is for the life of my son, and there isn't anything that I wouldn't do for my son, as any of you with children of your own can probably understand. A few days ago, we received a very rough estimate on how much all these tests and everything the hospital is doing is going to cost after the little bit that insurance covers, and my goodness. I don't want to get into specific numbers, but it's absolutely insane, and we wouldn't come close to being able to pay for it without your generosity. And that's not even counting the continued care that he's going to need after he's released, which is not covered by insurance at all. When we set our goal for how much we thought we would need on Give, Send, Go, it was really just a guess. And as it turns out, that even that might not be enough to cover everything. So if donations exceed our goal on Give, Send, Go, praise God, because Nathan is going to need it. So if you go to our Give, Send, Go and see that our goal is met, don't let that deter you from donating anyway if God is leading you to do so. Every little bit helps, and we have no idea how long Nathan's illness, whatever it turns out to be, will last. There's still a lot we don't know about how all this is going to play out, but whatever happens, we trust in the Lord. We also gently and kindly ask to please refrain from sending us medical suggestions. We know your heart's in the right place, but we already have a team working with Nathan and his specific blood type and other physical attributes that are not public knowledge. Thank you so much for your prayers, for your support, and for your generosity. Take care, and God bless.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Sharpening Report. I am your host, Josh Peck. Well, today we welcome back to the show our very good friend, Dr. Ken Johnson, who has authored numerous books and translations having to do with the Dead Sea Scrolls, ancient history, and prophecy. Today we're going to look at some prophecies from within these ancient texts that may shed some light on how close we are to the rapture and how close the world is to the tribulation. But first, if you are viewing on YouTube or Rumble, please subscribe. And on YouTube, click the bell for all notifications so you know when we post a new video, which has been fairly frequently lately. Also, if you want this full video here, head on over to dailyrenegade.com. The link is in the description and get a membership today. I will get more into that later. So without further ado, let's welcome Dr. Ken Johnson back to the show. How are you doing, Ken?
Doing good. Thanks for having me on your show.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for coming on, and thanks for being able to do it on such short notice. I've been trying to schedule as many of these as I can before I move. The audience already knows. If people are viewing for the first time, I'm moving to go work at Prophecy Watchers, and I'll be there next week. So I've been trying to cram in as many interviews as I can before that. So really appreciate you taking the time for this.
Congratulations on going to Prophecy Watchers.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm really excited about it. It's going to be great. Well, let's jump right in. So one thing that people seem really interested in is Enoch's Apocalypse of Weeks. Can you give us some background on what this prophecy is, and what are some key points that stand out to you?
Well, it's a prophecy found in the book of Enoch, and basically he takes all of human history, the Essenes and almost everyone earlier, pre-flood, post-flood, up to the time of the Messiah, had a calendar, and they basically taught that there'd be 7,000 years of human history, 6,000 of human, and then like a 1,000-year millennial reign of the Messiah. Same thing that's taught in Revelation. And so we usually break it up in sets of ages of 2,000 years or millennia, like 6,000 years, which is what the symbol of the Sabbath basically taught, 6 working days and 1 day to rest. And so Enoch did a little bit different. Each day was a century. And so you have a week of centuries, so 700 years. So he would break it up into like the first 700 years, the second 700 years, and so on. But in each one of those, he talked about the temple being built or the Messiah coming or the kingdom age or things like that. So they're very fascinating. They're very accurate and just some really big prophecies for that 700-year time period.
Excuse me. Where are we in that prophecy, and how can we actually tell?
One of the things is in the last 700 years, it talks about a judgment and gives you some information that we're talking about 1,000-year period. So that puts us the 300 years into the other or the previous day or week. And so what's interesting about it is it puts us into within the last couple of 100 years, the time for the beginning of the millennium. So there's several other books and several other scrolls that talk about that. So we're getting very, very close to the last Jubilee, the time when most of the prophecies would be fulfilled, and then the time of the second coming, which should start the kingdom age.
Yeah, which is really exciting. And when I looked into it, I was blown away to find out. I believe that we're right in the middle of the 9th week in that prophecy. And when you do the timing, the middle of the 9th week is 2025. Well, between 2025, 2026, somewhere around there. But so we're like right on the doorsteps of that, which is really, really amazing. There's a couple of more obscure prophecies that you found, and I believe it was in the Apocalypse of Ezra, but correct me if I'm wrong, having something to do with our food and a problem with our memories in the end times. Can you explain that whole prophecy and how that probably connects with our time today?
Yeah, it's in the Ezra Apocalypse, but it's actually in some scrolls and several other places, probably 5 or 6 different places. It's just one of the prophecies of the end times. There's atmospheric things, there's wars, there's earthquakes, there's all sorts of different kinds of prophecies. But one of them is that we begin to develop problems with our health because of the kind of food we're eating and or what we're breathing or toxins of some sort. The basic teaching is that if you eat the proper herbs and you eat a proper diet and get plenty of exercise, which that was easy back then, that you basically can live to be 120. And most of the scrolls, and even Josephus and other people from the first century, said that the average Gentile lived to be about 60. The average Pharisee maybe 70 or so. The average Essene lived to be 120, just like they did back in Abraham's time or shortly thereafter. And so this whole idea of eating proper herbs and that kind of stuff. So then there's a set of prophecies that talk about it gets bad at the end times. So each church, for instance, or group of people is supposed to have a pastor who has a heart for the Lord, a prophecy expert, and an herbal medicine expert. If you don't have those three people in leadership, you don't really have a church. So I just thought that was interesting the way they talk about it. But some of the things are we developed this odd form of forgetfulness. And of course, everybody gets a little, I'm doing the same thing. I'm in my 50s, almost 60, but I will forget stuff. I'll stop for a minute and think, wait a minute, what? Josh Peck, that's his name. I'll do this kind of stuff. But I remember what I'm talking about. It just takes a second to come. And then, but with stuff like Alzheimer's, once it's gone, it's gone. I don't know who you are, and I never will remember who you are. Those memories are actually gone. So it talks about that kind of thing. And it says it's because of the evil of our generation, which to me means greed. And we have things like excitotoxins that are put in the food that make you think you like the food better so that you buy some more, eat more. And that's wonderful for the pocketbook. If I'm selling you something, you'll get more of my stuff. But it kind of reminds you of the drug dealer that gives you a free sample to get you hooked and then charges you, and then you'll steal, kill, do anything to get it. So it's kind of a legalized form of that, I guess. And so no specifics in exactly what it is, but it's about because of the evil of the age, we have problems with food, we have problems with other things, and there is an unnatural forgetfulness, and there is unnatural anxiety, and several other things like that. The scrolls talk about the whole idea of going back to agriculture, growing your own herbs, things like that, to continue to live a good lifespan. So it's fascinating to look at that. It even talks about aging process begins to get worse. So if you think about it, pre-flood, we had lived to be 700 to 800, 900 years old. Post-flood, we lived to be about 4. And then about 4 to 5 generations into it, something else happened. And then we began to live 200. And it kind of trickled down. But the 120 is just kind of standard for us now, or should be. And there's actually about 6 or 7 different ethnic groups around the globe that still live to be 120 because of how they eat and what they do. So it's fascinating.
Yeah, it's amazing how that was predicted so long ago. I don't know if I'm remembering this right. This is just off my memory, which it's fading too. So, but wasn't there? It might have been in a different place or a totally different book, but I thought it might have been in the Ezra Apocalypse. Wasn't there something about like babies will start speaking like earlier than normal or something
Yeah,
like
there's
that? Does that?
several of those. I think one of them might be in the Ezra Apocalypse too. That's part of the aging process. It said that the
Hmm.
babies would start speaking before 1 year old. That doesn't necessarily mean carrying on a college age conversation, but and I'm not sure where we're at now. Some of the stuff was babies would be born at 4 months and live. It used to be
Hmm.
that a 7 month premature baby at 7 months probably won't live, and now it's like, oh, that's a done deal unless there's something weird. It depends on what caused the spontaneous abortion. But 6 months, and then there's been a few at 5, but that's really cutting it close. But our technology keeps going. But it talks about babies being born, speaking about 1 year or so. It talks about people like most of us gray at 40 or 50, or maybe 60 if you're lucky. I grayed early in my 40s. But it talks about people graying in their 20s. And so the whole concept of the lifespan and gestation periods, the whole thing goes down. So you can figure this if you look at the pre-flood world, they started having kids at 130 years old, and they lived to be about
Hmm.
900. Today, you could probably father or give birth successfully at 13, and we live to be 90. So it's basically the same ratio, just kind of ran down. So apparently that happens again. So the whole idea to me, though, I thought is interesting about that is that if you have something like that happen, the idea of it taking generation after generation, going down a year and then a year and then a year, means the Lord's not coming back for a few hundred years. And I don't believe that. I think the Lord's coming back pretty quick. So that makes it sound like, in addition to food and toxins kind of giving us diseases, somebody tries to do something, maybe through some sort of genetic manipulation to fix a disease or something, and it causes a backwards aging or something like that. It's just kind of,
Yeah.
it doesn't say, but for something like that to happen and it be completely fulfilled in, say, like a 7-year period or in the next 5 years or something, that would be pretty, it'd have to be something like that. So we need to very carefully watch our medicine. And that's what the scrolls talked about a lot of times, the whole idea of the book of Haggai, to have herbs that fix your problems or keep you healthy. And they believed in the Nephilim. So the whole idea of genetic experiments causing the mixtures of species, but also some of them didn't work out so well. So there's always problems. And the concept was that somehow toward the end of our age, they begin to bring back what they call Nephilim medicine. So things dealing with genetics. I'm not saying if they have a genetic cure that's going to fix your lungs or let you see again or whatever, that you shouldn't do it. But that's the crossroads where you have to start looking very careful at what we're doing.
Yeah, wow, that's a good way to describe it, Nephilim medicine, and we're seeing a lot of advancements in technology, genetics. I mean, it's getting really bad, and I wonder if it's this bad now, when we actually have Christians on the earth and the Holy Spirit is in Christians. Imagine after the rapture, how much worse it's going to get. The greed and the corruption, and how much worse. And speaking of that. There's something that you brought up before about the rapture and this idea of shining, or the shining ones that show up in the Dead Sea Scrolls in the book of Daniel. Can you explain that? And where do these references show up? Who are these shining ones, and what does that have to do with the rapture?
Well, remember the Lord at the Mount of Transfiguration. He was walking along, and all of a sudden Moses and Elijah showed up, and they were all transformed and kind of in glowing form or glorified form. And then after that event, everything was kind of normal. So we get an idea the glorified form actually gives off light. And you see that in a couple of other places. The scrolls talk about a time when the Messiah was in Qumran and the Pharisees came down to arrest him, but it wasn't yet his time. And it simply says he manifested and they left. So you have the same kind of thing when they go to arrest him and he says, I am, and they all fall back. So there's some really interesting things about that. But in Daniel 12, that's one of the things that I think is probably the easiest scripture to see a pre-trib rapture. And because the whole concept is, it talks about there's a time where there's a resurrection and then there are shining ones. So Paul tells us the resurrection and the rapture happens at the same time, in the twinkling of an eye. And so whenever this happens, there are people in their glorified bodies. And then it talks about the righteous at that point shine like the stars. And some of that is idiomatic, but it actually has a reference to the glorified form. And then it talks about from the time of the resurrection, which also includes the rapture, 3.5 years later is the abomination desolation and the starting of the persecution. And then it says the persecution lasts not 1,260, but 1,290 days. And so I'm not sure exactly how they overlap, but it shows us that it's two separate time periods. There's a 1,260 and then there's a 1,290. And they kind of go back to back or overlap a little bit. But if you have a rapture resurrection and basically 3.5 years to a abomination, and basically 3.5 years more or less to when everything is fixed, that's a pre-trib rapture. So it's fascinating just to kind of see that. And most of us, we go to 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, and Paul explains it very well then. But a lot of people that are not pre-trib have come up with ideas on why the revealing of the Antichrist is really this or really that. And if you plug in Daniel 12, it's pretty much a done deal.
Yeah, I totally agree. And you and I are both pre-trib rapture believers, and we actually have a viewer question relating to this, and we'll get more into viewer questions a bit later. But since this one is so similar to my question, I wanted to bring it up here. So I'll read hers, and then I'll read mine after. But Shanna wrote, he has addressed it in detail on more than one occasion before, but maybe he can touch on his studies of the pre-trib beliefs of ancient writers alive long before the quote Darby invented it nonsense that cycles around repeatedly. And so that's her question. My question, which is very similar, is: do you believe that the Dead Sea Scrolls and possibly other ancient texts, such as from the ancient church fathers, teach pre-trib rapture? And if so, what would be the best few examples that you could bring up?
Actually, yeah, there's quite a few. The problem, I think, comes from being in a denomination that believes a certain way. And then if you find evidence the contrary, you just say, well, that has to be symbolic or whatever. Because if it is, I've got to change my way of thinking. I've actually had people tell me that because the whole idea of Israel coming back, fulfilling prophecies, they say, well, it's not possible because we're Israel. Okay. And I understand that kind of theology. And that actually makes a little bit of sense, at least up until 1948. But when I point out the fact that they were supposed to come back and they did, and not only that, they were supposed to come back on a specific date and they did. So how do you, wrap your head around that? And I was actually told by one guy, it's like, well, we don't know, but it just flat has to be a coincidence because otherwise our denomination is wrong and we are not going there. And it's just like, okay, that's almost fair Sadducee talk. That's hinging on blasphemy there. So when Messiah comes and he's not exactly who you thought he was, and you thought your denomination was correct and it's not, change denominations. You just follow Messiah. None of us are correct 100%, but whatever Messiah says when he comes, just do it. But the same kind of thing happens with this idea. It's like, well, Darby made it very, very popular. And before that, it wasn't known very well. But you've got to remember in the Middle Ages, almost everyone was Catholic, okay? A Catholic, Eastern Orthodox. And there's always been people that have believed differently. But the vast majority, at least of books that we have and things, all taught Catholic doctrine. And so that's like saying, well, in the Middle Ages, everybody prayed to Mary, so we should pray to Mary. Well, no, I'm not Catholic. And there were people before the Catholics, in the first century that made comments like, Mary's not a goddess. We don't pray to dead people. It's a horrible sin, this kind of a thing. And they might be right and they might be wrong, but that's what they said. And it's the same thing with that. You've got several references in the Ezra Apocalypse about a group of people that are taken away before the destruction comes. And if you are here, and if you manage to survive that tribulation period, at the end of it, you'll see that group of people come back. And there's a lot of things like that. Even in the book of Enoch, it talks about a group of people that come and go and come back. And a lot of people talk about, well, why are we so special? We would get out of tribulation. And we're not special. And we happen to benefit from God's plan. The whole concept, according to the book of Enoch, is that it's to engender repentance. So the whole idea that everybody knows this wacky rapture idea, which is ridiculous, and then all of a sudden millions of people disappear, they're going to say, okay, it's not so ridiculous. It's the last ditch effort for help you to understand the prophecies are real so that you can possibly get saved. And that's basically what the scrolls are talking about. But you've got Irenaeus and Hippolytus. You've got the Epistle of Barnabas. You've got several people that talk about that. There's even a reference to a pretty clear reference, actually, I say 3 clear references to a pre-trib rapture in the Didache. And there's other first century testaments. And then there's a few other things like that real early on. But even in the Middle Ages, like 15, 16, and 1700s, before Darby, there are a lot of people that talked about, if we're reading this right, Israel has to come back. And then there's a time of what they call the catching away or rapt, RIPT. They use different terms. It's whatever language they were from, but the concept of some sort of a harpazo, taking away. So yeah, you can debate whether there's a pre-trib rapture, but you can't debate that it was taught before. I mean, that's like me saying I think the King James Bible was invented in the 1950s. Well, we all have grandfathers and grandmothers that have had King James Bibles. It's got to go back at least a couple hundred, well, at least 100 years, so you can't say that kind of stuff. There's too much evidence.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I think it's really telling when you see people online that are just flat out against the pre-trib rapture. They think it's like a doctrine of demons and all this stuff, and they'll use the most extreme language that they can. And usually, when you see most pre-trib rapture believers, and nobody's perfect. You're going to get it on all sides, but from at least the people that I've interviewed and talked to about it, and the way that I try to be is, we just don't fight about it, and we just talk about it, like we're talking about. But yeah, some people get like really, really upset. And usually I find when emotion starts getting into it, when somebody has to passionately, and angrily, spout their opinion, a lot of times it's because there's not as much fact to back it up. So they have to supplement it with emotion, which kind of tells me that's probably not, that's probably a sign that maybe at least this person doesn't have as much information as they think that they do.
There's actually an early church father that predicted signs of the end, like earthquakes and stuff, pulling from scriptures. One of the unique things that he mentioned is that there would be much contention about his coming. That's really all they said. But now that we're in this time period, we can see that. Because if I was to say, I thought the Magog War was at the end of the tribulation, or it was before, or it was 30 years before, you'd say probably, I don't see it that way, but whatever. And we could argue, mention stuff like that all day long, and neither one of us would get upset. But when you say pre-trib, it's all of a sudden we're ready to fight. And I just thought that was fascinating that the early church father, his name was Isaiah, said the same thing.
Wow. Yeah, that really is. I didn't know that. That's fascinating. Well, we're definitely seeing that today. You put together a phenomenal book called Gad the Seer, and many people might not have heard that name before. Who was Gad the Seer, and what did he prophesy, and how might that connect with events that we're seeing play out today?
Well, it's fascinating because in the Bible, back in Chronicles, Kings and Chronicles, we're told during the days of Samuel, with Saul, David, and Solomon in that particular era, there were 5 prophets that wrote books of prophecy. There was Gad, Nathan, Ahijah, Shemaiah, and Iddo. And for whatever reason, they were not put in the canon, but there was a group of Jews that did keep those records, and they've come out in other places too. So I was able to get the text of Gad the Seer and part of Nathan, and I'm still working on trying to get some of the others, but they're just ancient prophets from around 1000 BC, and very, very fascinating. Gad prophesies what I believe to be very clearly a pre-trib rapture, among other things, in chapter 14. But some of the fascinating things is he begins to identify, we're always looking for that Babylonian mystery religion in Revelation, which is described as a harlot. It's Babylon. It's, this kind of stuff. And there's enough things in scriptures to kind of connect them, but you still aren't never quite sure, And so Gad comes out and says, basically, there will be 2 anti-Semitic powerful religions. And he describes them, one from headquartered south of where Israel's at, and their symbol is a crescent moon. Okay, so I think I know who that is. And the other one is a group of people led by one guy who actually is Trinitarian, not completely monotheistic. Remember, back in the ancient days, everybody knew God, or the prophets did, and they were Trinitarian, but according to the scrolls. But this group, even though they seem good, they're headquartered in Rome, Italy. And of course, back in that day, there wasn't much of anything in Rome, Italy, and nothing in Saudi Arabia, basically. But these two become very powerful anti-Semitic religious powers. But they're not the problem. Somewhere toward, they probably fight amongst them themselves, as far as we know. But somewhere toward the end of time, either they or factions from those two groups form this other religion, and it becomes the dominant, what they call the harlot religion. That's what Gad teaches. So today we would say that's some sort of Chrislam or some sort of combination type thing. Not sure exactly how it manifests, but to have these scrolls talk about those things, and like the Dead Sea Scroll Testament of Noah giving us more information about the empires and how they come together, it's very, very fascinating.
Yeah, especially since we've been seeing the the rise of Islam and Christians that so-called Christians that believe that Christianity and Islam worship the same God, which when you actually look at the text, it couldn't be more different. But we've been seeing that kind of rise up for a couple of decades now. It's not super huge, but it's growing, and I can definitely see how something like that would be could explode in the end days. One topic that people really love is the ancient Dead Sea Scroll calendar, and we've done a ton of interviews about that. But for those who might not be familiar, for those new to the channel, we've been getting actually a lot of more new people viewing the channel, which is great. Could you go through just kind of how this calendar works, how the Essenes would have used it, how it applies to the Bible, and what we can learn from it prophetically?
Sure, it's fascinating because it's not prophetic in and of itself, but the calendar is amazing. Most of us know about a Jewish calendar. There's Nisan and Tishrei and the 12 months of the year, and comparing it to our 12 months on our Gregorian calendar. Ours is solar. The modern Jewish calendar is lunar. This one is solar. So, according to the Dead Sea Scrolls, and I guess there's no way to really prove or disprove this, but it's their calendar and their explanation, is that God gave the original calendar. It clearly shows the Sabbaths and the festivals of the year. It shows the years, the Shemitahs, the Jubilees, and the centuries, onas, and ages. And so there are several things that they plug into. Like, for instance, one of the scrolls talks about Messiah dying for our sins. And that event is one Shemitah after the ninth Jubilee of their Ona, which they were in Ona 8. And so when you plug that into the Gregorian calendar, it means the Messiah is supposed to die in 32 AD, which fits perfectly with what Christians believe. And so there's several other things like that, and the prophecies kind of connect all those dots. So we know exactly where we are on the calendar line. So again, we're all looking for that year 6000, and that last Jubilee period before is when a lot of prophecy occurs, a lot of the rapture, the tribulation, the second coming, Antichrist, all that's in there somewhere. And not necessarily at the beginning or at the end, but somewhere in there. And we're approaching that really quickly. March, which is, actually next Tuesday from the time we're doing this, is the Essene, on the Essene calendar, the new year. So that begins the Shemitah year, the last one of this Jubilee or this generation. Then we have a Jubilee year. Then we start the very last 50-year period, which is called the last generation. So that's really interesting for a lot of Bible prophecy people. But it basically does that. It works out that way. And the interesting thing about it, we all believe that there's no filler in Scripture. So when it says Jesus did something and then 5 days later something happened, you're supposed to know exactly what we're talking about. And most of us would say we'd have to grab a calendar and try to figure out the year and then the date. And the way the calendar works, it's very simple and very easy. If I was to ask you what day was New Year's on, you'd say, well, it was the 1st of January, but it's different every year. It might have been Wednesday or Thursday, or who knows? We'd have to get a calendar and look. Well, the calendar always happens on the Wednesday closest to the spring equinox. So that's always New Year's. So Passover is always on Tuesday, the 14th, and on down like this. So when it says that, Jesus had the Passover Seder, 3 days and 3 nights later, he resurrected, you don't even really have to look at the calendar. You can just do it in your head. And so all these things instantly come out. Like, for instance, John 2, when he goes to the wedding of Cana, it says that it was on the 3rd day. And we're like, 3rd day of what? 3rd day of the week? What are we talking about? I have no clue. Well, if you knew the calendar, you know exactly what they're talking about. A lot of weddings, like we have June weddings, everybody wants a June wedding. For several reasons, a lot of people had their wedding on the festival of new wine. And that is the 3rd of Av is when that takes place. So he's in there for a wedding in Cana on the 3rd, obviously the 3rd of Av, festival of new wine. And he arranges this to turn water into wine. So if we knew more about that festival, it would probably make a lot more sense to us what's going on. But just things like that. Moses did something, 5 days later something happened. You know if it was a Sabbath, what day of the week, what closest festival it was, the date even a lot of times. And you just know a lot of stuff. And that helps you figure out a lot of prophecy.
Yeah, it's phenomenal, and I mean, because of that calendar, we know that we definitely live in some really interesting times. I mean, like you said, the final Jubilee is set to start in like a year or from now or something, and for people out there that are worried, thinking like, oh my gosh, I have to wait till 2075 before Jesus returns. We need to remember there is a rapture that happens before, and we don't know when that happens. The rapture isn't the thing that kicks off the tribulation period. It's the confirmation of the covenant with many. So you could have a rapture pretty early, and it could be years or even possibly decades between that and the start of the tribulation. Or if it is around the same time, we don't know how long after the tribulation, when Jesus comes back and takes care of everything. We don't know how long those judgments take. We don't know how long it takes to figure out what they're going to do with the temple, whether they're going to cleanse it or just rebuild it. I mean, we read in Ezekiel, there's this amazing city and temple. That's probably going to take some time to build. I don't think Jesus is just going to snap his fingers and it's all just going to appear immediately. He could do it like that, but I think that's actually going to be built. That could take some time. So you could have an early rapture and tribulation and still have some time before actually the official start of that millennium. And you know, when we look at the way that the Torah age ended, technically that would have ended around 75 AD. Now we would say the church age started 32 AD with the dwelling of the Holy Spirit. So there is kind of an overlap to some of these events and how it could all play out. So I just don't want anybody, if somebody's viewing this for the first time, don't worry. Nobody's saying that we're absolutely going to have to wait till 2075 for something to happen. Could be, but we don't necessarily have to believe that would be the case. It certainly didn't happen like that at the end of the Torah age. Stuff, prophecies started getting fulfilled pretty early. Oh, and I should mention, because of the calendar, Ken and I have available a print version of the Dead Sea Scroll calendar that has not only the ancient calendar that the Essenes would have used, but also our normal calendar that we use today. So you can look to any day and see if there's anything significant, like a feast day or anything like that. I have a link to it in the description below, or you can go to dailyrenegade.com and find it there, or you can go to Ken's website at biblefacts.org. And all of the proceeds for those are split between Ken and I, and it really does help both of our ministries continue so we can keep bringing you content like this. So I wanted to make mention of that. There's also an online version too at dsscalendar.org. Before we get to the members only section, in your opinion, what are some of the most exciting and prominent prophecies that you found in your research? And I know we can't set dates, but how close do you believe that we might be to the rapture and tribulation?
Well, kind of like what you were saying, the rapture could be at any time. I think it is closer to the beginning of the tribulation than, like a really large gap or something. That being said, I've often thought that 2075 either is the second coming or the dedication of the temple. And if we have to build the Lord could do whatever, but it just seems like he's going to have us build it, or it comes in pieces or whatever. So that may take 10, 20, 30 years or so. So it is interesting that the scrolls prophesied a 40-year gap between the death of the Messiah and the end of the age. And they prophesy a 7-year gap at the end of our age, where there's this Gentile king who's claiming to be God incarnate, Son of God, the Messiah. And it's really, really fascinating, all those things, how they look at Daniel. And I think we're getting really close to that end of that age. I really thought that we wouldn't see any kind of prophecy at all until we get in that last 50-year period. But apparently I was wrong, because last year the Hamas war started, and Israel is very intent to actually finish the problem. If they do, that will actually fulfill Obadiah, Zephaniah, and a few of the other prophecies, because they eliminate Hamas. And that's one thing that the Dead Sea Scrolls taught, is that the Psalms teach prophecy. And one of the ways that you understand prophecy is that a psalm or a passage of scripture is written about as a song, and it's played on a certain musical instrument. And if a certain musical instrument has, four strings or 10 strings or whatever, that tells you the una that it's supposed to be in, if it's a prophetic psalm. And so we have things about the 12th una, which is our age, about prophecies like out of Amos 6 about a government seat or structure in Gath of the Philistines named Violence. Well, when you put that in English, you're talking about a government structure of the Gaza Strip who calls themselves Hamas. And they cause a problem with Israel and eventually are eradicated. And in the process of doing this, Israel takes and holds southern Lebanon. It tells us where the new border is going to be at. And then they colonize the Negev. And then there's a whole bunch of other things. We've got the destruction of Damascus. We've got a war between Israel and Iran. And that's actually mentioned in the book of Enoch also, which has got some very interesting details in Enoch that Scripture doesn't have. And then there's, like I say, the colonizing of the Negev. The Benjamite tribe is found and migrates home. There's several other prophecies like that we might get to see, because those may happen, especially if like Benjamites come home and then they're the ones that colonize and it takes 5 or 10 years or whatever. Then we might begin to see some of that stuff immediately or after this war. So it's really fascinating. We've got the Gog and Magog war involving Russia. We've got the formation of the 10 kingdoms, which we may or may not see, but it's interesting to look for. So there's quite a bit of Bible prophecy to look at, and the scrolls give us several more clues with all that. As far as studying prophecy, what we've always said is basically memorize Daniel. Daniel is like the best ever as far as prophecy. Daniel and then Revelation, but Revelation is really symbolic, hard to understand. But those two, and then there's the Ezra Apocalypse, the Book of Gad, the Seer. The Testament of Noah is amazing for setting the chronology parts together. And then there's whatever the Dead Sea Scrolls say about prophecy in general, and then the early church fathers, because they will come around and say, well, we've always been told by the apostles and everybody, this is how you interpret it. And it's basically the same. I'm just excited to see the scrolls and the church fathers interpret the Bible the same way we always have. And it's just very logical. But to know that's the way it was been given is pretty amazing.
Absolutely. And many of those books that you mentioned, you have available online. For those who might not be familiar with Dr. Ken Johnson, he actually has English translations that he's done himself of many of these books. Where can people get your books and follow you online?
BibleFacts.org is our main website. And then you mentioned the DSScalendar.org for the calendar stuff. Excuse me. But we have a YouTube broadcast with a live Q&A every Monday night. Currently, we've been studying the Book of Enoch. We started at the first of the year, and we're going through that now. But we have that, and then we have the bookstore there on the website. They're basically just links to Amazon, so you know your credit card is safe and all that. But we have 34 books, I believe. I'm working on my next one, my number 35. Hopefully, I'll have that done for the Prophecy Watchers Conference this spring, or this summer, rather.
Oh, awesome. What's that one about?
Smaller Dead Sea Scrolls that contain prophecy. So there's actually a lot of their commentaries on the minor prophets and a lot of little scrolls that talk a lot about mainly first coming prophecies, but there's quite a bit of second coming prophecies in there too. And they're really amazing. I remember I always read Nahum. And I always thought to myself, why am I reading Nahum? It's just straightforward that. It has nothing to do with me, but it's like, no, it has something to do with you or it wouldn't be in the Bible. You read the Dead Sea Scroll commentary and boy, was I wrong. There's actually quite a bit in there. And then we have almost the entire Habakkuk commentary, which is very eye-opening.
Oh, fantastic. Whenever that comes out, we'll have to have you back on to talk about it. That sounds great. As we conclude the free section here, what do you want most for the audience to take away from the interview so far?
Just that we need to study, and it's not hard. We don't need to try to kill ourselves doing it, but study, come to a conclusion, build on what you're doing, understand that there are cults out there that twist things. But if the scrolls that are pre-New Testament and the New Testament, and then the early church fathers that are post-New Testament all say the same thing, that's probably true. And then later on in the medieval church, if we get this, there is no pre-trib rapture, you need to worship angels or whatever happens, the Kabbalah and other stuff like that comes along later. You can ignore those. And so to understand we're in that time period, we're going to be here a little while longer. It's not going to end like in the next 10 seconds. But at the same time, it's going to happen in the near future. And even at that point, we don't know how long we're going to live. You could have a heart attack at any moment. So we really need to get our lives right with the Lord. And that's not hard to do either. It's just something that needs to be done. You need to recognize that you are a sinner. I am too. We all have problems. Nobody's perfect. But the Lord came and fixed that for us. So if we accept him as our Savior, we can have a free gift of eternal life. That's the major point. And I think that's the whole reason for prophecy, because there's no way you or I could tell the future and make it happen, but somebody did. And if they can do that, and they say, I can give you eternal life if you just simply do this, I think that's a pretty safe bet too.
I totally agree. Amen. All right. Well, we are going to head into the members only section. And if you're viewing at home, you will not want to miss it, because we have some phenomenal viewer questions about Enoch, Nephilim, and so much more. So to get the full video, head on over to dailyrenegade.com and get a membership. It's only $10 a month or $100 a year. And if you can, I highly suggest getting the $100 a year, because it's technically cheaper in the long run. Essentially, you get 2 months for free. So go get a membership today, watch the full video, join in on our community at Daily Renegade social media page on the website, dailyrenegade.com. It's for members only. And there you can make your own profile. You can post. You can comment on others' posts. It's a great way to fellowship it's a way that the church is desperately missing today. So head on over to dailyrenegade.com, get a membership today. Okay, if you are viewing on the website, just hold on the line. You don't have to do anything, and we'll get right back to it. Everyone else viewing for free on YouTube or Rumble, thank you so much, and until next time, take care and God bless. Okay, members only. Thank you all so much for supporting what we do at Daily Renegade. Let's get right back into it. We have some viewer questions that were brought in, and a lot of these are really good. One thing that a lot of people have been wondering, and I've wondered myself too, is Sharon asks, where did the giants come from after the flood? What's your opinion on that? You got some really good information on this.
Yeah, there's actually several records about that. We're on our study on Enoch. We just finished up the pre-flood Nephilim history, so we've got to figure out how they ended the civil wars and what happened to them. And so that's the next logical question. Well, what happened afterwards? And we don't know for sure. I mean, there could be multiple things that happen. People talk about genetics coming through, which doesn't make sense. In other words, one of the daughters or one of the wives of the three sons may have had some Nephilim DNA or whatever. That's a possibility, I suppose, but nothing says that. And we can speculate all day long with stuff, but I tend to want to stick just with the scrolls and church fathers, whatever is written. Like Paul said in Corinthians about nothing beyond that which is written. It really helps to curb the speculation. But we have a couple of scrolls that talk about it. We understand that, for instance, pre-flood, there is genetic tampering. We have one scroll called the Book of Giants that tells you actually how to go about starting that kind of study of mixing species. So, and it's a genetic type thing that they do. So it's accurate. So what happens is after the flood, we have Canaan, who goes up and builds Zidon. First thing, he goes out of the allotted territory into Shem's territory. And it's a big deal, and we don't really know why. It's connected with Noah's dream that he has in Genesis, but he explains it completely in his testament. And so we know what's going on there. He's after the old forbidden knowledge. And so if you go up to Zidon where he made the port, that's about the closest place on the coast that you can get to make a pilgrimage kind of straight over to Mount Hermon. So the text talks about him finding documents, the writings of the Watchers, and beginning to emulate this stuff or put it back into practice. Well, the next thing you know, there's giants in the land of Canaan. And so not just giant people, but there's giant grapes, giant, everything. They've figured out how to make everything work better, kind of. And so that's basically at least one of the things that we know for sure, according to the scrolls, that happened is that we just simply found the Nephilim medicine, so to speak, and tried to recreate it. And that's what's fascinating to me, because now we have people, I mean, some of the scrolls talking about toward the end of the age of grace, Nephilim medicine comes back, which means some sort of genetic something. And we have all these things. People are trying to make pig hearts, which are very similar to humans, better for transplants and lungs. And we've got cows now that produce human antibodies. And there's all sorts of things like that. One of the most fascinating to me was when they first started this, they took the gene of a jellyfish that makes you glow. We talked a little bit about the glowing. It's part of our DNA, I think, that's been curbed because of sin. But they managed to take the DNA from a jellyfish and put it into mice and cats and dogs and things like that. And they tried it on a gibbon monkey, and at first they couldn't get it to work, but eventually they did. So not a big deal, I guess, although in the wild, I think that would go extinct, the ones that glow, But that kind of stuff happened. I mean, it's not a joke. I know there's a lot of weird stuff on the internet, but that's not a joke. That's documented. And so we continue to do like testing and things like that. And this is the private part, so I guess it's okay to talk about anything. But
Yeah.
one of the problems that I've always had is I'm not anti-vax. Vaccines can be very beneficial, but you test it. You don't throw something together 5 minutes and then inject it into somebody. That's just asking for trouble. Normally, you wait a decade. So we've had this last vaccine, which has helped some people and killed some people, according to some of the reports. There's always problems from both sides of the COVID, and everything. But the main problem I see, that's always been, I mean, when they come up with any vaccine, there's always some people that react badly to it until they get it fixed, and then if you're taking a vaccine that's been around for a decade or two, it's probably safe, but the whole idea though, that this stuff comes back, and the push to hurry up and change your genetics to make you where you're immune to these things rather than doing it the old fashioned way, is just the push that's beginning to go down that road. I don't necessarily think it's even linked to the mark of the beast. Maybe, maybe not, but it's going that direction. And we need to, as Christians, resist that kind of thing.
Yeah, definitely, especially today. Is there anything in the scrolls or anything that actually talks about how the process worked? Like what the writings of the Watchers actually said? Like what was the process to actually bring back these hybrids or these Nephilim, or do we just not know?
Yeah, actually, there's one of the scrolls called the Book of Giants in the Dead Sea Scrolls, kind of explains how it works, and it gave an example of taking a sheep and a goat, and you make a half sheep, half goat type thing, and like a donkey and a horse make a mule, and a lot of times those are sterile, of course, so you can't really go forward with them. But instead of mixing genetics using test tubes and all this kind of stuff, if you know the outcome or how to do it, you just simply mate them, and then if they're not in heat, there's ways to make certain smells to get them in heat and things like that. But the whole concept, when you read the whole thing, it talks about how they took 200 horses and 200 donkeys, and then that produced at least 200 mules. And then, of course, if two specific kinds don't make the one that can reproduce, then you just kind of rotate them. So you could create hundreds of mules, and out of those hundreds of mules, you probably have at least a handful that can reproduce. Okay, and then you go forward with that. So what they're doing is they have to know ahead of time, I guess, what they're looking for, and the angels would. But you take two similar life forms, mate them together, get some that's whole and can reproduce, and it's an unstable life form. Today, we would just simply look at the chromosome count. Horses are here, donkeys are here, mules are right in the middle. And so it created an unstable life form, because most of the time, if you tried to mate one thing with another, it's different enough that it just doesn't take. There's no pregnancy. It just doesn't work. So there's other things to do. And there's probably herbs to make sure there's no spontaneous abortions and stuff like that. Because I know there's herbs to do the opposite too. So, but it just described this whole process. And to me, it's interesting because there's stuff in the Middle Ages, like those grimoires. It's like, well, how do you do this? Well, you shake your head and walk around the table 3 times and you say these magic words. And you and I would look at it and say, that won't do anything. It's just stupid, But this actually is like, no, it's a mating process. You have to do it just the right way. So if that would work, and if we would try to do that, that's exactly how we would do it. So it's fascinating to look at that. And then, of course, now all of a sudden, out of nowhere, somebody starts experimenting. I think some of our scientists are reading the Dead Sea Scrolls, actually, and doing what Canaan did. It's like, I don't care. I'm going to recreate it. And the spooky thing about it is once this can of worms is opened up, there's no going back, because we have laws on the books saying we don't experiment with human embryos. We're just not going there. But when China does and Russia does and other superpowers do, and they may be successful, the military doesn't say, oh, well. The military follows directions to figure out how to fix that or how to make one better. So it's no matter what the laws are, somebody somewhere will continue to do this and have lots of disastrous, things going nowhere. But eventually somebody will create something that works, like the Nephilim clans, or a virus that works, or something like that. And that's kind of what was prophesied, I believe.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and we live in strange times, and it's kind of exciting to talk about it, because we realize, if things are getting that bad in the world, we're just that much closer to when things actually get fixed, which is great. Michael has a question. I believe I've heard him say that Enoch prophecies in the Bible and states that. Oh, okay, it's worded a little weird, but I think what he's asking is basically somewhere in Enoch it says that Enoch's not supposed to be in the Bible. He's looking for that verse and can't find it. And then just to add on to that, how should we as Christians look at the book of Enoch, and should it be included in the Bible? Should it not? Do we look at it as scripture or just history? What do you think?
Well, just like in the first century, you have some people think there aren't prophets anymore. Okay, and so even if that's the case, in the first century, there were prophets like Agabus. And so they made prophecies. They may or may not have made any end time prophecies. I don't know. But if they did, they would have wrote them down in a book. Presumably, we would have got that in the canon, but you don't know. So just because there is a real prophet that has a real gift of prophecy or word of wisdom, word of knowledge for a person or for a group or for a later century, doesn't necessarily mean all of those are in the Bible. And it doesn't mean that just because it's not in the Bible, it's got to be fake. So that's something that we have a problem with. That kind of a tradition has come from 1,000 years of false prophets trying to get right junk and all the cults and stuff. So we do need to be very, very careful of that kind of stuff. The early church fathers said that they believed that the book of Enoch, what we call First Enoch, is the book of Enoch. And there were several others that were written, like Second Enoch, Third Enoch, and things like that, that are written by cults. That's one really nice thing about the church fathers. Sometimes they'll come out and say, no, this is a fake book. We know it was written by a guy down the street. It was a certain cult. They're called this. They wrote it for this reason. The guy's in jail. I mean, they tell you all this history. And so that's really fantastic when they do. But yeah, in Book of Enoch, I think it's like 105 or something like that. He talks about the fact that there will be a collection of books that the righteous live their life by. So that's our canon. Okay. And then it mentions that his is not supposed to be included in that collection of books. And then in chapter 1, actually, he says that the book is addressed to those people that live in the time of tribulation. And then there's even that quote out of that Jude gives about when the Lord comes back with 10,000s of his saints. So we're talking about the end of the age of grace, the establishment of the kingdom, not necessarily right then, but that 50 or 100 years or whatever toward that time period. So you get the idea that this is supposed to be outside the canon. and separate. And the reason for that is, if you just think about it, it's logical, because if you come up to a person and say, you need to be a Christian, here, read the Bible. The Bible consists of 5,300 and some books. Some people are going to say, I'm just going to hell then, because I can't read that much. Just forget about it. And so the Bible is designed, as Peter said, all that you need for a life of godliness and faith is contained even in the New Testament. If you just read the New Testament and believe it, you can be saved, and that's really all you need. However, the more you know, the better. And like lawyers and doctors constantly study and learn new things and have libraries of like a couple of hundred books in the back, that are pretty complex. So we can do the same thing, or at least some of us can study that, anybody that wants to. But since there are so many fake books, you need to be very, very familiar with the New Testament and fairly familiar with the Old before you get into that kind of stuff. For instance, I talked a while ago about the Testament of Noah. Fantastic. It contains real prophecy, which is corroborated by Daniel. Very, very good. However, there is a book and there's a Testament of Abraham actually too. There's also a book of Abraham that is part of the Mormon group of canon. And so when you look at that, you can tell it's basically nothing. So just because it's got somebody's name on it, and it's supposed to be old, doesn't mean it is. So there's a real book by that name and a fake book by that name. So we just got to be careful of all that.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with you. Russell is asking, was Yeshua and the Essenes a vegetarian?
No, that would be against the law. They have to observe the Passover Seder, which is the eating of the Passover lamb. Peter was still a fisherman. So, and even Paul says this whole concept of not eating meat is a doctrine of demons. Not that you can be a vegetarian. If your doctor says you have some oddball problems, I strongly suggest you eat peanut butter and leave beef alone or whatever. Follow what your doctor tells you, unless he's giving you enough full of medicine. But this kind of stuff you need to be careful of. But it's not a physical reason for eating meat. This is a spiritual one. The concept is that if you are a vegetarian or you're this or that, you'll be more spiritual. God will like you better. And that's got nothing to do with anything. So there is a fake document called the Essene Gospel of Peace. And there's a Gospel of Barnabas that is sometimes used by the Muslims that talk about Jesus being a vegetarian and stuff like that. But that obviously was not true. I mean, he ate the Passover meal with his disciples. And the whole idea that, Paul talked about that we messed up, or the Corinthians messed up the communion. And that's why some of us are dead or asleep. Don't mess up the ritual. You don't have to do rituals. So either do it or don't do it. But if you do it properly. So nobody's going to do a Passover Seder and not eat the lamb, right? So that kind of thing. And so they were not vegetarian. This is pretty obvious too, because there's been several digs in the Qumran area that have brought up Passover meals. I guess they had the idea that it's so sacred they didn't want to throw the trash away; they just bury it. And so there's the bones of the lambs and stuff like that. So they were obviously not ate meat. And along with that, we have to understand that kind of stuff comes in Genesis 9. You have part of the Noahide laws, and we're told as people, as nations, Gentile nations, to eat anything that moves as long as you kill it and cook it properly so you don't get sick. So anything you want to eat it. Then in Leviticus, you have the Jews, mainly the priests, being told you have to eat kosher. Okay, you only eat these things. These are forbidden. These are okay. Then in Deuteronomy, which is right after that, you have, like in Deuteronomy 14:21, you have the account of you're a Jew, you have a cow, it dies without being slaughtered, so now it's no longer kosher and you can't eat it. So what do you do with it? You give it to the Gentiles because they eat that stuff, the ones that live in your gates, in your cities. So you've got this, if you look at it very carefully, this whole concept. We're not Jewish priests, so there's a ton of those laws that don't apply to us. Just like even if I was Jewish and my wife gave birth, she would do the ritual for giving birth. I don't give birth. I'm a guy. I'm just different. So there's all these different sets of laws, and it's all one system of law, but we don't want to mix them up. And that's why Paul said to be very careful to divide the word of truth appropriately.
Amen. Ruth is asking, given that the Dead Sea Scrolls were found in the 1940s, why do the Essenes start to be heard of about 10 years ago or less? Or is that just my ignorance?
No, actually, that's a pretty good understanding. The first of the scrolls came out in the 40s, and then there were some in the 50s, and then there was a few other things found later. But what happened was the big scrolls, which are mainly multiple copies of the scriptures, like we've got 38 copies of Deuteronomy and things like that. It's just Deuteronomy. Everybody already has those. So there's no danger in releasing those to the public because you can't cause a controversy when it's exactly the same thing. So we have a whole lot of them that are highly fragmented. I mean, so much that maybe they're about this big and there's 2 letters on them. Who knows what that means? There's no way to kind of put those together. But the others are fragmented, and some of them are not fragmented, but they actually give Essene theology. That's where the danger came out. It's like, I'm not sure we want everybody to know this. Because like when you read 11Q13, you find out that the Messiah is our Melchizedekian priest. He's actually God incarnate. He comes to die and pay the penalty for our iniquity. It happens in 32 AD. And because of that, the age of grace begins. And then it begins to talk about several other prophetic things. So be that as it may, that's apparently what they believed, or whoever wrote that one scroll. And so when that comes out, you've got a lot of people going, I'm not sure about this. Some of the texts talk about you only pray to God. You don't pray to angels or people. So the Catholic people are like, we don't want that to go out, And there were copies of some of the Apocrypha. So some of the Protestants may not necessarily want you to know that, and things like that. But I think mainly what happened was in the 1990s, one of the professors or one of the archaeologists actually had his own copies, photos of everything. He died and he bequeathed his whole set to the Huntington Library. And they said, cool, we'll publish it. So they actually published it. I think it was in 1991. And then instantly there's this lawsuit for the powers that be said that belongs to us. And there's he was working for them at the time. Technically, it's their property, etc. So it actually went to the Supreme Court, I think, of California. But anyway, the obvious ruling is that the copyright goes to the people who wrote it. They've been dead 2,000 years. So it's public domain. So they were allowed to publish it. So the full text for people to study has only been out about 22 years, 24 years, something like that. And so that's not a time for any denomination to study it and go, you know what, we need to change some things. So it's really, really new information as far as that goes. That's politics, basically.
Yeah, very interesting. Let's do one more. We actually have like dozens of questions, but if we do all of them, we'll be here for 5 hours. So we'll do one more before we let you go. Zeph is asking, is the Book of Nicodemus a reliable source of truth, as well as Pontius Pilate report? Recently been reading these releases from the Vatican Treasure Trove.
I haven't read the recent releases, but I studied them in seminary. And there's a couple of different versions of each of those. And so some of them definitely have some historical problems. There's 1 or 2 versions that are Gnostic, and there's others that don't seem to have any problems, but we don't know if they're fiction or not. The church fathers do talk about Pilate and about his suicide afterwards and his imprisonment and that kind of stuff. Basically, when you get Caesar that heals, there's this Messiah guy. He hears about this Messiah guy over there and that he can heal people without herbs. And I have a problem. I want him here now. What? You killed him? So he's in serious trouble. So you can see why this is probably correct in what's going on. But there's a lot of things that do tend to contradict in different manuscripts. So first off, knowing that there are multiple copies and they're all slightly different, I can't say that there's at least one of them that's not correct. we'd have to go back and really look at that. And that's something that I plan on doing in the future, but there's just so many scrolls to look at. And I think it's more important to look at the scrolls, specifically the prophetic part, that might help us to understand something now than back then. But that would definitely be worth looking into.
Yeah, I agree. It sounds really interesting. Well, I guess that's it for today, Ken. Thank you so much for coming on and talking with us and answering some of the viewer questions. Really, really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And thank all of you once again for being members and for supporting Daily Renegade. Head on over to Ken's website too, BibleFacts.org, and he does live streams every Monday. So you want to make sure that you check those out. All right, everybody. Until next time, love you all. Take care and God bless.
Welcome to the program today. Mondo Gonzales here in studio, and we have got a great program for you. We are going to be here talking with Dr. Ken Johnson and Josh Peck about a very interesting topic, the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Essene calendar, what's coming up in 2025 and 26. You are not going to want to miss it. Before we go to these esteemed gentlemen, I want to remind everybody about our upcoming Colorado conference, which is going to be June 27th through the 29th in Colorado Springs. You can go to prophecywatchers.com and get all the information that you need there. Also want to remind you that if you can't join us in beautiful Colorado, that we are going to be live streaming the event. Again, you can get information there. We have a couple other events that I want to remind you about. I will be going to Greece on a Eastern Mediterranean cruise with Billy Crone and Tom Hughes and a few others. And we're going to be doing some prophecy talks and lectures on the ship, as well as seeing Athens and Corinth and other spots. Basically a missionary tour of where Paul went. And so if you want information about that, that is going to be in October. Again, prophecywatchers.com. If you go to the events tab and just scroll down, you'll see places where you can find information to get about that special trip. It'll be fun. And one last thing, we are gearing up as well for a prophecy conference in Branson, Missouri. Yeah, it's going to be a great time, and you can find information on our website as well. So lots of things going on. As we know, the world is changing very fast, and prophecy conferences are a great way to stay not only informed, but also to hang out with others. I mean, really, that is one of the goals, is to fellowship with others who are like-minded. And thinking of like-minded, gentlemen, both of you, welcome.
Thank you. How you doing?
I remember, I took a class on Qumran in seminary, and so I've always loved the Dead Sea Scrolls. And so to sit here with you guys is great to talk about some of these things. And I think for our audience, maybe Josh, why don't you start with you for a second. Help our audience. Let's say they don't know anything about you. Mm-hmm. What have you done, and what have you written about the Dead Sea Scrolls and Qumran? And then I'll ask you the same thing.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I've been studying it not as long as Dr. Ken Johnson has, but he was actually the one that really got me into the Dead Sea Scrolls. And so I wrote my first book about it, which was Lost Prophecies of Qumran, and I started writing that in 2020. And now I just got the final draft done. I'm working on an updated and expanded version called Forgotten Prophecies of the Dead Sea Scrolls. And that one, it gets a lot more in depth with some of the amazing prophecies, and also the history of the Essenes, who were the writers and keepers of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Not every Essene had anything to do with the writing. That was some of the scribes, but it gets into all that history, gets into prophecies that they had during their time, which they called the Age of Torah, and our time, which they actually called the Age of Grace, which is really phenomenal stuff. So I think people are going to get a lot out of that.
Awesome. And Dr. Ken here, you've written certainly a lot about it. And what kind of got you into this? And then, of course, you kind of, I wouldn't call it a hobby. It's been your joy. Mm-hmm. Talk about what got you into it, and also kind of the breadth of what you've written.
Well, I started when I became a Christian in my teenage years, and then I realized after going to different churches that they taught different things, different denominations. So I got to the point where I looked up the early church fathers to find out what they taught about all the different things we disagree with, just for my own peace of mind, to find out what was proper doctrine. And in the process of doing that, they talked about Enoch and scrolls and several things like that. Then I got recently the ability to go look at the entire collection of Dead Sea Scrolls and look at them, translate them, see what I thought, compare them from a Christian standpoint, and found out that they had a lot of extra biblical commentaries, prophecies, mainly about the first coming, but completely accurate. and then there's things about the second coming. So I just wanted to pull them all together because I've always been fascinated with prophecy also. So that's why I do what I do.
Mm-hmm. You know, when you think about the Dead Sea Scrolls, originally began to be discovered in 1947, or right around the establishment of the State of Israel. Maybe let's talk about that. We know that, at least in the New Testament, we have the Pharisees, we have the Sadducees, we have the Herodians, we have the Zealots. You have these different political parties, and the New Testament does not mention this group known as the Essenes, and so. Where do we, Josh? Tell us kind of and get kind of go back and forth here. This will just be fun. Where do we learn about the Essenes at all? If not from the New Testament, where do we hear about them?
Yeah, one of the first mentions that we get, if not the first mention, is in Josephus. And Essene is just a word that means healer. So we don't see that in the New Testament, but we see it in extra biblical works like Josephus and lots of other places. They're actually written about quite extensively, like in Hippolytus. Which actually, in my new book, I do include all of that as appendices. There's 8 appendices in the new book with all these ancient church fathers that talked about the Essenes and ancient historians and stuff. And now that's a good question though. Like in the New Testament, do you see a correlation, Ken, between if there was a group mentioned, who would the Essenes be? Would that be the scribes, or who do you think?
The scribes were a different group, but generally they were referred to as just the Jews. And the interesting thing about that is when you actually go back and pull it all together, there are several Essenes in Scripture.
Yeah.
According to the church fathers and the Dead Sea Scrolls both. Simeon, who sacrificed, or not sacrificed, but circumcised our Lord, apparently was a teacher of the school of the prophets and therefore an Essene. They kept that whole order. Another one is when Paul and Barnabas were anointed to go forth. It said the Holy Spirit wanted them to go forth on missionary trips, and it said that 3 prophets came down from Antioch, and it names them. One of them was Menachem, or Manian as it is in Greek, and we have his whole history of him being with the Essene order and actually leaving the Sanhedrin because of becoming a believer, and it's really fascinating to see that whole thing, all the history behind it.
Was that the same individual that had that prophecy about Herod?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's him.
Yeah.
So we'll talk about that. Don't leave the audience out. What prophecy of Herod? Talk about.
Yeah. So there was an Essene named Menachem that had when Herod was basically a kid. He was a lot younger.
We're talking about Herod the Great here.
Yeah. Yeah. He had this prophecy that he would be a great king, but then eventually become corrupt. Well, when Herod actually became king, he brought Menachem, to him and said, okay, well, what now? And how long is my reign going to last and all that? And he told him. And that was one of the amazing things about the Essenes is that they're recorded as having 100% perfect prophecy. And that's just one small example. But yeah, it's fascinating stuff.
Yeah, and when you read in Acts, it talks about how this is Manian or Menachem, the one that was in Herod's household. So just to let you know, we're talking about the same guy. The fascinating part about that is it's not even really that hard. They're known to be prophets, but if you know the prophecies about the one that betrays the Christ is an Edomian, and then you're looking at Rome going, we tried Pharisees, that didn't work. We tried Sadducees, that didn't work. We're going back and forth, and so the next logical place might be one of these 5 guys. One's an Edomian. Well, that's him. I mean, it's pretty obvious. You can go back through and look at all these things and see how you could just figure it out almost after the prophecies are given. It's fascinating.
So, and we know that the Josephus mentions that the Essenes were not just out in the desert.
Right.
They
were all over.
They were all over the place, and so I think he lists they numbered in the thousands. And so let's talk about that. We know as well, the first century, 100 BC. We see, even before that, the Maccabean revolt, and then we see all of the Hasmonean dynasty, and that connection that happens in this 100 years, basically 100 BC down to 0, if you want to say it that way. But let's talk about the time frame. The Essenes, in the sense of what do we know as it relates to their origination and their time frame and their extensive, even maybe a little bit of a history, how they rebelled against the Jerusalem, group. Talk about that. Okay.
Go for it.
Basically, their story is that Jews were Jews, and when we came back with Ezra, everybody believed in a Messiah, him dying for our sins. It's just basic 101 Judaism. Then cults rose up for different reasons and became known as Pharisees and Sadducees. Somehow the cults took over the government and then ousted them. There was even these targeted assassinations, and they had to go to Egypt for a while until the Daniel prophecy about Rome stepping in and creating a peace. And at that point, they were supposed to go back into Israel and prepare the way of the Messiah. So it was all set in their mind what they should do. So if you look at it like that, Judaism is the same as Christianity. It has the same doctrine. And when they don't, because it's Pharisees and Sadducees, it's basically because a cult rose up and kind of took everything over. So their basic idea is that stuff started around the 200s BC and kind of came in waves. And then they had the dispersion and the comeback. And there's a whole lot of history that they give. They say that there's actually a book with everybody's genealogies and the events in Shemitahs and Jubilees throughout all of time that they have. So it's fascinating.
Yeah, and one of the major things that caused the split was the issue with the calendar. So probably around the time of Antiochus Epiphanes, 4th, maybe 5th, but probably the 4th. They came in and they said, okay, well, basically we'll let you do some of your Jewish stuff, but you have to adopt our lunar calendar, because before that they had a solar one, the one that they said that God gave to them, and there was a big split there. So the people that would become the Essenes said that they weren't going to do that, so they left, and then the ones that stayed and said, okay, we'll change our calendar. They changed to this pagan lunar calendar.
So the Greeks, you're saying that the Greeks were imposing on them a lunar calendar?
Yeah, yep. And it's interesting because you can look at the history of the Seleucid Empire, and they have a calendar that's basically the same as the lunar calendar that they ended up adopting. So you can kind of pinpoint where this was. But according to the Essenes, that was a major sin, because there were certain rituals that had to be done on specific days, and if you don't have the proper calendar, you're going to miss the days. And we know with some of those things, if you do them wrong, you could lose your life. And what's really interesting is there's actual records where it was like before that time, out of all of history, there was maybe 18 priests or something like that have ever died. But then after that happened, it jumped up to like 300. That died because they were doing these rituals and things on the wrong days. They were doing them wrong. So that was one of the main things that caused this big division. But what's amazing is that original solar calendar was perfect, and it fits with the Bible. So when we get day counts, like prophetic day counts with the 2 witnesses, or even things where it says, on the 3rd day of the month this happened. Well, it's mentioning it for a specific reason, and now that we know what that calendar is, and now that we have that calendar, thanks largely to people like Ken Johnson, who I wouldn't be able to put all that together, but we can actually see, like, okay, it says this specific day. We can look and see if it falls on a festival day or something like that. And even prophetically, it answers amazing questions. There's a big debate. Do the 2 witnesses come in the first half or second half of the tribulation? Well, in my mind, that's settled now. It has to be the first half. And I go into the book as to why. It has to do with they had what's called a leap week every 5 or 6 years. When you look at the prophetic day counts of the 2 witnesses, or of all the other stuff in the second half of the tribulation, it all fits perfectly. So in the second half, there's probably not a leap week there. In the first half, the 2 witnesses stuff, it makes a lot more sense if you have that extra week, because then you start seeing festival days that line up with them. And so in my mind, they have to come in the first half of the tribulation. So things like, and there's other reasons too why that's the case, where you don't need the calendar for that. But it's little things like that, like just knowing those day counts, having the calendar, and being able to actually count it out. It's explosive. It's amazing in terms of prophecy.
So how do we when we think about, at least in the Bible, that the month begins on the new moon? Mm-hmm. So that's very lunar, right?
Not exactly.
So yeah, explain that, because again, you see,
there's a specific word for moon, and there's a specific word for new month. Mm-hmm. And if you're using a lunar calendar, it would be one and the same. Mm-hmm. But when you go through the scriptures in the Old Testament and the New Testament Greek, the Greek and the Hebrew both, it's actually the word for new month.
So
it doesn't really say new moon.
So yeah, chodesh, right? I mean, mm-hmm. so you have. So that's very important, because again, here you have this, I would say, I don't know, maybe it's forced on the text that chodesh is this idea of a new moon rather than a new month.
Yeah, so it's really important that way. Along with what you were saying, one thing I thought was fascinating is we had the Yom Kippur War, and in 1973, and we just had the war started with Hamas last year. So when you look at the dates of when they start, it's not the same date on the Gregorian, the modern Jewish calendar, the Arabic calendar, or any other calendar. But on the Dead Sea Scroll calendar, it's the exact same day. And that's just one, and you could say that's a coincidence. But when you start seeing all those kind of coincidences, that's what makes it really interesting to look in the study of prophecy and other things.
So let's talk about then the debate that's happening in the sense, we have the state of Israel, here they are, what is it, year 5784 or something like that, right? Whatever the year is. But yet, that is based on a Pharisaical calendar. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about these two, for those that might not know anything about this. Like, well, yeah, but I know, I follow the Jews, I follow Israel, I'm a supporter of Israel, and that's fine. But their calendar says it's 5784 or whatever. But what's this idea with the Essene calendar? Let's talk about the differences there. Where did it originate from? This difference.
The major place there's an ancient Pharisee document called the Seder Olam. It's a historical book. It dates from about 160 AD, and it talks about the fact that at one particular point there was a rabbi named Yoshi that didn't want people to associate Daniel chapter 9 with the coming of Messiah. So he said the prophecy in Daniel 9 is from the going forth to rebuild a Jerusalem, that command, to the destruction of that temple. Now that's only 40 years difference, and of course you can't do that. He was kind of laughed out, but he came up with two other theories about how that would, and he changed the era of the Persians, changed the dates on that stuff. And still no one liked it because you just can't do that. But then there was the dispersion and all the other stuff. So then what happens in the second or third century, Rabbi Hillel recreated the calendar, and all of a sudden we have this missing 167 years. And so from that time forward, we've had the lunar calendar with that number on it. And if you go back to the Talmud, which actually quotes the Seder Olam as accurate history, you can see that they quote it, they look at it as legitimate, but they still hold on to the other system. So we've got actual written documents on how and where those dates changed.
I think it's important too to remember that during this time, there was a great amount of even really the first century into the second century. We think about Justin Martyr. There was a great level of Christian evangelism or Messianic evangelism by Jews, by Messianic Jews. Of course, as we know, the first Christians were Jews. And so you have this history, and even Justin Martyr in his book, the second century, he's talking with Trypho the Jew, right? And he's having this discussion, and he's talking about Messianic prophecy. And so there was a lot of success as it relates to winning over people who were Jewish based on Messianic prophecy. And so you do see this rabbinic movement that ended up seeking to change even the text, the Masoretic text, as well as these others, in order to make it not possible for Jesus to be the Messiah. And so to think in terms of, it might have been, and I think it is true in ancient times, there was such for the scribes and others, the transcribers, who would copy these Hebrew texts. They were very serious and respectful. But later, when you have such success going on with Jesus being received and so obviously, right, fulfilling Messianic prophecy, that the early rabbis were like, again, after Jesus died in first, second century, we need to fix this. We need to change this. We need to limit the opportunity for Jesus to be seen as the Messiah. I mean, there's definitely so this comes into play then as it relates to the calendar issues.
Oh yeah, for sure, and it's really interesting too, because going along with that, in academia there's this big mystery, like what happened to the Essenes? They just disappeared and they left all of their scrolls behind. Well, one thing that, and this was something new that I learned that I didn't write about in the first book, but it's in the second book, is there was an ancient custom, I guess you could call it, or ritual, where they looked at the text as so holy, they weren't just, if they were done with them, or they weren't just going to throw them away. So they would actually like bury them or put them in pots and put them in caves, and so they would do that. So that's probably why a lot of those were left behind. But the Essenes were the early Christians. Those were most likely the ones that, when you read through the Gospels, there are some times where Jesus just like walks into a room and everybody gets saved, basically. But then there are other times he's saying everything he can say and he just can't make headway with some people. Well, I think that's the difference between who's the Essene and who's the Pharisee or Sadducee, because the Essenes had all these really specific prophecies of what to look for with the Messiah. They knew exactly what it was. They knew that the Messiah was going to be, come in two stages, the first coming and second coming. And the Pharisees had a different interpretation of that. They thought it was going to be two different people. And so when they saw all this happening, they knew it and they got saved immediately. Well, those are also the ones that took the Great Commission seriously. And I think, and they also knew there was this prophecy about the temple being destroyed. They knew they had to get out anyway. But they were the first Christians. We come from the Essenes. They went out, they took what scrolls they could, buried the rest, and went out and preached the gospel to the world, and we're the benefactors of that. And to me, just the fact that we have that rich of history that most of the church doesn't know about, and actually a lot of Jewish people, unfortunately, don't know about either. Just the fact that that's there is just mind-blowing.
Let's talk about what a lot of people want to talk about, and I think, because we all think we are all guilty of loving dates. I mean, whether it's date setting, whether it's date suggesting, or maybe it's just hopeful. I mean, I would love to know the date of the rapture or the date of the arrival of the second coming. And so let's talk about the 2025 date. Okay, there's this date. It's not just manufactured out of thin air. Why? Again, for the average person that doesn't do this like what you guys do in the sense of, study full time and everything, why should 2025 have any significance at all? Let's talk about that.
Well, basically, just really quickly, they have a calendar, and their concept is there are 7,000 years between the creation.
Just the Essenes have a calendar.
Essenes,
okay.
Yeah, between the creation in Genesis and the creations of a new heaven and a new earth. So that encompasses 6,000 years of man's history and a millennial reign. They have that all mapped out. So theoretically, if that's correct, the last 1,000 years starts in the year 6,000, and they divide these into Jubilee periods, 50-year periods, which sometimes they call generations. And so with this, they mark the age of creation, the age of Torah, and the age of grace, and then a millennial reign. So not trying to set dates per se, but on their calendar, that last part should start in the year 6,000. So the last generation, or the last 50-year period from before the year 6,000 would start in 2026. So the year 2025 is the Jubilee, or the 50th year of a 50-year period. And so a lot of the scrolls talk about the fact that prophecy can happen at any time, but the bulk of prophecies occur at the change of the ages and the change of the Jubilee periods. So when we're looking at that, and we think about Jesus talking about the last generation, that kind of thing, we see that a lot of prophecies will probably happen in 2026 to 2075. Now, like I would have guessed, the war with Hamas would have started a couple years from now.
Yeah, in the future.
But it actually started, last year.
Yep. So in thinking about this, I know, my background's in the ancient Near East, and so you have the biblical chronology, the kings and everything else, and they do a lot in regnal years, and fifth year of such and such. Well, in thinking about that, you have the trying to connect with an absolute date, in the sense of especially connecting with Egypt. Egypt is very helpful when you look about the different dynasties of Egypt. So in that case, you have whether it's the Egyptian chronology or even the biblical chronology, here you have the Essene chronology. So you have these different calendars out there. I guess for us, we're sitting here living in the Gregorian chronology, right?
Right.
So, Josh, how do we anchor? How do you anchor the Essene calendar anywhere connected with the Gregorian calendar, which will allow us to understand why we're in 2025. Well, shouldn't 2,000 years been there? So where does it anchor at?
Yeah, there are definitely differences, but Ken has actually developed a really wonderful free tool on a website called dsscalendar.org, where it superimposes the Essene calendar right onto our Gregorian calendar. So you could look at, and it does it for year to month to day. We also do have a print version that he and I worked on together. If people are interested in that, if they want to hang it on their wall, but it's a free resource, and you can use that to see, like, okay, so today's, this date, what would that be on the Essene calendar? So that helps out a lot too. So then you don't have to do a bunch of math every single time you want to figure it out. And one thing that I wanted to mention too about the prophecies being in the last Jubilee, and the final Jubilee of the age of Torah. So their ages would be 2,000 years apiece, and then there's a final Sabbath age that's only 1,000 years. We would call that the millennial reign of Christ. Well, at the last 50 years of the age of Torah, that was between 25 AD and 75 AD, according to our understanding of the count, or 76 AD. But it's in that time period. Well, the rapture is only one prophecy. There's a lot of prophecies that we have that's going to happen before Jesus returns and sets things straight for the millennial reign. Well, when you think about that, 25 AD, Jesus came the first time probably around 29, 30 AD, somewhere around there.
Starting his ministry.
Yeah, starting his ministry. And then look at all of the prophecies that got fulfilled in a really short amount of time until he was killed in 32 AD in the indwelling of the Holy Spirit and all that. And then finally you get a few decades where things happen too until the destruction of the temple. But all of that really important stuff that sets the stage for the next age, they didn't have to wait till 75, 76 AD for that to occur. That happened pretty early in the final Jubilee of the Age of Torah. So while we can't put a specific date, we could say that, yeah, according to the Essene calendar, 2076 should be the first day of the new age, if their calendar is correct, and if it continues the way that we think it's going to. But that doesn't mean that we have to wait all that time, or even 7 years before that necessarily, for the rapture. There's a lot of different ways that this could pan out. We could have an early rapture, and you could have a gap between the rapture and the tribulation. That's one possibility. You could also have a gap between the end of the tribulation and when the next age starts. How long is it going to take for Jesus to judge everybody? How long is it going to take to set the world up and to build the amazing temple and city that we read about at the end of Ezekiel? Which, of course, we all believe that's all totally literal. It's not figurative. Well, that stuff takes time, and I don't think Jesus is just going to come down, stamp his fingers, and everything's different. I think that stuff is going to have to be built. So we don't necessarily have to wait that long. We can't put a date on the rapture, of course. There's nothing in the Dead Sea Scrolls saying any kind of date or anything like that. It's really consistent with biblical theology. There's little hints of the rapture throughout it, but it doesn't give us a date. So we don't know. But so the dates that we have are more about a time frame rather than a specific date. So we're looking at a 50-year time frame where a lot of things could happen early on, just like it did at the end of the Age of Torah. So I think that can kind of help hopefully relieve some people when they hear 2075. I got to wait that long. I'm not going to live that long.
Let's talk about that because and I just like to throw things out because where my mind works. So we know on the Gregorian calendar that we are, if Jesus, most New Testament scholars believe Jesus was crucified and resurrected on 32 or 33 AD. Okay, that's the kind of those 2 years. Some people will say 29, but that's not. The best date is that 32, 33 framework. Okay, so I don't think we've lost too much understanding in our calendar. What I mean by that is here, let's fast forward to 2032. So here we got 8 years from now. Well, it's pretty solid then that there's 2,000 years going from the time of Jesus to this period from 32 AD to 2032. And that's an age. That's an age, right? I mean, according to the Essene not calendar, but according to the Essene chronology of 2,000 years being an age. So is it possible, and we also know that, again, 70 AD, the temple was destroyed. So are things based? Could it be off? Could could have the new age began at the time of Jesus' resurrection, and then the temple gets destroyed 40 years later in the still new age of grace? Could there be, is it off, could it be by 40 years off? Because here's what I'm saying is that if let's say we come to 2075, and we'll still be here, Lord willing, maybe. Okay, that's 40 years from now. Oh no, it's longer than that. It's 50 years. No, maybe I won't be here. Okay, but let's say we're sitting here and we're old and decrepit by that time at 2075. Now we're looking, hey, it's been 2,040 years from the time of Jesus' resurrection. That seems a little bit weird, doesn't it? That you would have not 2,000, you would have 2040. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. Yeah, so the way that I understand it, they would have a specific date as the beginning of the next age, even if it doesn't specifically line up with anything prophetic on that date. So their final Jubilee in the Age of Torah would have started 25 AD. And I don't know that there was anything specific that occurred there. Now we would say, well, the church age began in 32, 33 AD with the indwelling of the Holy Spirit. And yeah, it did. That's when like the church really started.
And we're coming up to 2,000-year anniversary.
But the specific age and the way that they lined out their chronology would have been 25 to 75. So the way that I kind of explain it in the book is it seems like in these final 50-year periods, and you can even see this in every age. You see this in the first age too with the Tower of Babel and Call of Abraham and all that, but it seems like there's this period of time where prophecies start to happen to get ready for the next age, so that when that 75, 76 AD date hits, everything is set in place for the next age to begin, even if some of that started early. So it would be like if I was going to throw a birthday party next Friday. Well, I have some things to prepare before then. So I got to get a cake. Maybe I do that tomorrow. I got to get the presents. I got to hire attractions. And I would spend the rest of this week like doing all that. So I'm doing things to get ready for the party, but that's not specifically the party, even though they're all going to play important roles when the party happens. So that at Friday at 3 o'clock, let's say, the party happens. I think it's kind of the same way. So the way that I look at it, these final Jubilee periods, it's almost as if these two ages are kind of like melding together, where you get the start of one while the other one's winding down. And so you get this kind of blending thing. So I don't think that we would say necessarily that, well, since 32 AD, that was the indwelling of the Holy Spirit, so that's the start of that age. I don't think the Essenes would have saw it like that. That would have been one prophetic thing that happened in that age.
At the tail end
to prepare for the next age. But the official start would have been 75, 76 AD. But that's also why it's really difficult to put exact set dates on this. It's more of like time periods that we look at. Does that make sense?
Yeah, the thing that I would add to that is I think we can rock solid set dates for their calendar system.
Yeah.
Not necessarily the prophecies on it. So for instance, on their system, which ends at 75, they talked about the first coming of the Messiah when he would atone for our sin nature. And the event that would occur is one Shemitah after the end of the 9th Jubilee of that Ona. And so if you look at the end of the age being 75 minus a whole Jubilee period, which is 25, and then you go forward a Shemitah, which is a 7-year period, it brings us to 32. So they're saying it's scroll 11Q13, they're saying that the Messiah would take care of our sin nature 32, 33 AD is what we would put on our calendar. So that, lets it sink in really, really well, give or take a year. And so that means the end of their calendar year for the year 6000 would be 75 or 76, 2075, 2076. So I think that's pretty rock solid. As far as the other prophecies, like he's saying, you've got Jesus being born, 30 years later dying, the church age starting several years later, the destruction of the Jerusalem temple 2 years later, the taking down of the Essene temple, and then the end of the age a couple of years later, and then several years later you got the Bar Kokhba rebellion, and when that finally ended, that pretty much ended everything, and then the great dispersion. So you've got a 150-year period there where all sorts of things happen as a group, kind of. And so we're seeing that today, actually. If you take the 150 years before the year 6000, you had the Balfour Declaration, you had the establishment of Israel in 1948, the taking back of the Temple Mount in 67, and all the other things that have happened, the new priesthood, the practice sacrifices that have started up. So all those things are going in process.
So the year 6000, what Gregorian year would that be?
2075
Oh, okay. Yeah, because that
would be the year 6000.
Okay. So let me ask you this question, and again, thinking out loud here, is so ultimately, if we're comparing what we've experienced in reality, in the sense of the Christian era, from a Christian perspective, we would recognize theologically that the age of grace began at Pentecost, right? And and we're coming up on that 2,000 years. Here again, we're 9 years short, or so, 8 to 9 years short. So, does that make any difference in the sense of understanding that the age of grace truly, now not in an unseen way, but in a practical way, truly began at the time after Jesus' death and resurrection?
I would think it could, and I think it depends on how you use the term. Like, for instance, I know in a lot of the church fathers, they talk about how the Antichrist persecutes us, the believers, the church. And everybody says, oh, well, that's got to be, post-trib rapture type stuff. And when you look at the way they use the church, they're talking about believers. They actually define it from Abraham forward. So when they say church, and that's not how we use church,
Right.
and I'm not saying you're right or wrong, but they mean believers, okay? And so when
Like
we
historically, even all the way back.
Right.
Okay.
So when we say the age of grace, you and I are talking about the church age. And I think they're talking about the age of grace on a calendar, which may be different. So the church age and their age of grace might be different than what we refer to as the church age.
So yeah, anything you want to add to that?
Oh no, that's exactly right. So you ask any Christian nowadays, like how long is the church age, and they'd say, well, it's been about 2,000 years, but we don't know how long it's going to last. It could be another 6,000 years. But if you were to ask an Essene the same question, when they hear age, they're thinking a 2,000 year period specifically. So they would just say 2,000 years. So yeah, it just depends on how we use the terms.
Yeah, because obviously, even in terms of the Torah as it relates to the 613 commands, that came with Moses.
Yeah.
In 1400 BC, 1445, 1444 BC. So that's certainly many centuries after Abraham.
Right.
And so to have it be super tight like that,
Exactly.
it's hard to believe that the Torah began with Abraham.
No, it's still the age of Torah even before the Torah came to be, because the age of Torah would have started with the call of Abraham, but it was, again, setting up everything that needed to be for that age to operate and work. So there's a lot of different prophecies and different ways on how things can be, when things can happen within certain ages, but it's like, what is that period mostly known for? Well, that's the age of Torah.
As a matter of fact, according to some of the manuscripts, it talks about the age of Torah or teaching is supposed to start with the guy that starts the group of people.
The whole movement, yeah.
So Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob kind of are the ones that started Israel, and the nation of Israel would bring Messiah. So that's the start of the age of Torah. And when you look at their chronology, the call of Abraham when he was 52, not when he went down to Canaan, but when he was called, actually was the year 2000 on their calendar. So that hit exactly at the end of an age.
So so here we're talking about we're coming up on the year 2025. We're got 6 months left to 24 or so, 7 months left. Then what's significant then in the sense of trying to explain the Essene calendar? What's happening? Let's go to March of 2025, spring equinox. Let's talk about what is significant about that.
It begins this next March begins the 50th year of this Jubilee period. And then the following year is the last generation or the last Jubilee before that. So we should start seeing a lot of prophecy fulfilled. And we have seen things that we've never seen before, like Iran actually attacking Israel. That's prophesied in several scrolls and in scriptures, but we've never seen that before. And this was short-lived, but it's not the only time this is going to happen, because there's some great details in that. We've seen a lot of things happen with Israel, and we will begin to see a lot of wars, a lot of expansion, a lot of different things. Zephaniah, Obadiah talks about the time when they colonized the Negev, They take back Gaza. They control Lebanon up to Zarephath, which is the 6 miles north of the Litani River, which is where they're saying they're going to take and control that now as part of the... now, whether that actually happens or whether it happens in some political figure later on gives the land back, which has happened multiple times, either way we see it in prophecy. So there's a lot of interesting things happening.
Anything, Josh?
I think he covered it.
So, I'm just going to, I know what all of you are thinking out there, and I'm going to be your advocate right now, okay? Now, I don't want to believe that we have until 2075, okay?
Mm-hmm.
That,
Well, that's just till the beginning of the millennium.
right.
So we got a tribulation, we have all sorts of prophecies that need to be fulfilled in that time, and they could all come early, because there's, again, it's perfectly reasonable to have the end of the tribulation and still have some decades before the next age starts, and because there might be things that need to be done. Again, how long does it take for Jesus to judge everybody at that time? How long does it take to build the temple and for people to, beat their swords into plowshares and to get the word around the whole world? This is the way that things are now. How long does it take to build that temple in that city?
Well, you're talking like the millennial temple.
Yeah, the millennial, that we read about in Ezekiel. Like, how long does all of that take? I don't think it's going to be the day that Jesus plants his feet on the ground, all of a sudden this stuff is miraculously just there. It could be, and I don't know for sure, again, because there's a lot of different ways this could play out, but it could be that takes time. And again, another option is you could have an early rapture and a later tribulation. And you could have, because the rapture isn't what starts the tribulation. It's the covenant, the signing of the confirmation of the covenant with many is what starts the tribulation. So there's a theory out there that it's possible you could have the rapture happen, and you could have years in between that and the tribulation. So that's a possibility as well. I'm like you. I don't want to believe that we have to wait until I'll be 90 years old if I make it that long. So there are different ways, and it might be that, but there are ways to look at it where there's nothing preventing the rapture from happening immediately today before we even finish this interview. There's nothing preventing that. And then you can still have all of those prophecies happen within that period and still have the calendar make sense. Or maybe Jesus was just literally, I'm going to cut the days short and we're not going to wait till 2075. So there's God can do whatever he wants. But I think the consistent view would be to look at 2075, 2076 to be the time where everything is put in place, everything is finished, where we can start the first day of the millennial reign. Everything's done. Temples built, cities built. Everybody knows the new rules. They know the festivals. All the other nations know that they got to come up for tabernacles, and just everything's done. And I would think just practically that's probably going to take some time to set up. I don't think it's going to be able to be done the last day of the tribulation. But, again, there's different ways to look at it.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. The whole idea of the scripture says that those days will be cut short. Now, that might be 5 days, or it might be days like a couple of decades.
Could it be 5 decades? Could it be a whole Jubilee cut short?
I would assume. I wouldn't think it'd be a whole Jubilee. Of course, if that's the case, the rapture should have happened a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
Right.
So no, I guess not.
Yeah, because you start thinking about, again, I love, we're not date setting here, but it's fun to speculate, isn't it?
Sure.
I mean,
Yeah.
no one's setting a date, but it's fun to think out loud about the possibilities, and we're all to be, and no matter what we decide today or not figure out or whatever, we're still going to get up tomorrow and do the Lord's work. Okay, no one's quitting their jobs. I find it. Go ahead.
I think one point that we need to remember too is we're talking about calendar systems, which may or may not be 100% accurate. If we looked at the modern Jewish calendar and tried to pinpoint the year 6000, it's over 220 years away.
Yeah.
I'd much rather have it be 50 years instead of 220.
Yeah.
So if we're looking at the Gregorian calendar, I think we missed it by 24 years.
Yeah,
So it's just like, it's a calendar system.
Well, and that's kind of what I look at too. Is again, we are, when Pope Gregory, again Gregorian, when he's looking at, the Julian calendar, the Roman calendar, and then he starts like, we need to make this a little bit better, or at least Christianize it, right? Certainly that's what he did as a Catholic. Well, he looked back and he could see there were some discrepancies. I think he dropped like 13 days or 16 days off of. He's like, well, this doesn't work, so we're going to evaporate those and we're going to squeeze it all together. Which again, that's the nature of looking at different calendar systems. Egyptians used to have a 10-day week. I mean, you have stuff like that. So I think what I look at is, that's what I was leading up to. Well, if the 32-33 date of Jesus' death and resurrection is relatively accurate, which I think most scholars would recognize that's true, then we're coming up on an age ending.
Yeah.
So even if it's not necessarily connected to the specifics of the Essene calendar, their idea of what an age would be as 2,000 years. And in my mind, I like the idea much better. I'm sorry, guys. No offense.
Me
no
too.
offense. I like the idea of thinking, which again, it's not a prophecy by any means, of thinking that the church had an opportunity to evangelize the world for a full age. And that would end roughly around 32 or 33 AD.
Yeah, Jesus might come back in that year to finish what he started and there's still time for the tribulation before that. I mean, and if that's the case, man, the rapture should be coming up pretty soon.
Because what I find fascinating is going back to some of the other stuff that you and I have talked before, Josh, about even Apophis and thinking in terms not so much of the 2029 date but of the 2036 date.
Yeah.
Which I find interesting too, that, again, I don't think we could prove that Apophis arrives at 3.5 years into the tribulation to that level of specificity. But if we were to go with that as a theory, I know talking to you and Derek and even Tom was, then you subtract 3.5 years roughly, that brings you to the fall of 2025.
Yeah, it does.
So you think, oh, wow. But if we were to look at it differently in the sense of a 33 date or 32 with that 2036, in the middle of 2036, and you take 3.5 off of that, it brings you back.
Works.
It brings you back. If Apophis was to hit the earth, hypothetically in 2036, because even Neil deGrasse Tyson, I have a clip from him not too long ago where he describes that the 2029 arrival of Apophis. He said he specifically there's this keyhole. This is the language that we use, and if it comes through and it's supposed to come at under 20,000, around 20,000 miles near the surface of the Earth in 2029. Well, the moon's at 240,000. So the way he was describing it was, if it comes through this keyhole, it's going to affect the trajectory, the orbital trajectory of the Apophis, so that when it comes back, this is his words.
Yeah.
Secular guy. He's not a Christian. He said, if it comes through this keyhole, the 600-mile keyhole, in 2029 and just scrapes us, it will hit us in 2036.
Yeah.
I found that really amazing that he was willing to say that publicly, because he's got a lot at stake in his mindset. But again, that idea would then fit with a 2033.
The dates still work.
The dates work.
Yeah.
Which gives me some hope that I won't be. I was born in 1974. So
You're still young.
Well, at the end of it, I'll be 102, gentlemen.
I was born in '84, so.
Okay, so you'll be a little younger. You'll be a little younger than me.
You're both young. I was born in 60. When was I born? It's been so long. 65.
You're 65.
Yeah, 1965.
Oh, wow.
So we got 20 years apart,
Yeah.
10 years apart. Yeah, so you'll be 110, roughly.
If I do the Essene diet and use the herbal medicine just right, I might still be here. Well, I think it's interesting, no matter how you look at it, all those dates, the speculations, you notice it's all in the last Jubilee, which is in the last generation according to the scrolls.
Yeah.
Well, there's even another one, a 2068 date, and that's 7 years from 2075.
It really is, the 2068 Apophis date. So, I mean, needless to say, I think all of us, regardless of whether we look at the Essene calendar or where we look at anything else, the average person, I mean, come on, guys, the average person that is just all of us. Here we are, thinking about the world. I think about and when I mean the average person, I'm thinking about, not in an academic sense. I don't really mean it that way. I just mean like my brothers or my sisters, the average American out there that's sitting there just living life and not necessarily focused on prophecy. They're looking around and they're going, man, the world's changed.
Yeah.
Something has changed. And so when we see this, and we see Israel becoming a nation in 1948, them controlling the old city in 1967 in Jerusalem. We are not, this isn't, I don't see, oh, well, Jesus will come back in 1,000 years. No, the fact that God brought Israel back in 1948 was the big sign that we are approaching the end of the age. And now, of course, we've seen a prophecy begin to unfold. So as we look, we don't even need the Essene calendar to tell us that, right?
That's
right. We can just look around and say, yes, here we are. But then to have some of these other calendars come and they seem very consistent is pretty amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really interesting too, because according to the Essenes, at the end of every age, there's always an apostasy. So in the first age, there's the Tower of Babel incident. Second age, we got everything with Jesus and the Pharisees, and there was clearly apostasy going on there. And then you look at if this is the end of our age, you look at the world today. This is so different than any other time in history, just with the technology that we have. I mean, and it's almost hard to realize it because we've been born into it, so it just seems normal to us. But human beings, as far as we know, have never lived like this. Like, this is so weird and different, and it's brought up so much like debauchery and really you'd call it apostasy. Like, it's brought up so much opportunities for more evil, more than we've ever seen in the history of the world. And to me, it's like, that's too weird to just not be anything. Like, why is it now all of a sudden that we have this big technological revolution? I mean, it wasn't that long ago we were still using horses and carriages and stuff. And why is it now? I mean, why couldn't the Greeks have done that? They could have. They were smart. They had math and everything. And any other nation could have done that at any other time. But it was like there was something restraining it, charged word. But and it seems like that whatever that restraining is kind of lifting, and all of a sudden we live in this crazy weird world, and it's just we're in a place, especially now, where you cannot believe anything. We have more evidence for things than we've ever had before. We got video evidence, and nobody ever had that before. But you can't believe anything you see on TV. You can't believe any video you see. If you see a video of Donald Trump saying something, you don't know if it's a deep fake or if that was actually real. And that's like the world we're in now. I mean, again, I'm only like 40 years old, but it's so different from the 80s. I mean, we didn't have any of this stuff.
Yeah.
And but now, I mean, and it's exponentially, it's getting faster and faster and faster, to the point where every year doesn't feel anything like the last. So for that to be just nothing and just to be business as usual, it's not significant at all. I'm not buying it. I think we're at the end of an age here, and I think this kind of thing is what we would expect.
I think we have these are those correspondences that come to play, where we can look around. Again, the average person knows that that the world has changed. Again, even unbelievers are, what in the world? What has happened, especially to our country and other things? All the wokeness, all the gender confusion. I mean, this is crazy stuff. And then to have these other convergences of the calendars come into be. If you want more information on it, certainly go to prophecywatchers.com, check out our bookstore. Both of these guys are on there, and we carry all of your material.
Yeah, I should mention too, my new book, the super expanded version, 712 pages. It's going to be available at prophecywatchers.com. And again, I'm only a few days away from the launch. It could be by the time this airs, it might already be out. So people should check out prophecywatchers.com and keep checking every day, because it's going to be on there soon.
Yeah, and we'll definitely come back and do a one-on-one interview for sure on that. And once I get my greedy little hands on it and to do it. And so, both of you guys kind of share, in addition to, obviously you've joined us here, which we're excited about. But where can people find out more information about what you're doing?
Oh, sure. Well, my other website is dailyrenegade.com, and that's a place where I put all of my videos. I talk a lot about Dead Sea Scroll stuff, and then also like quantum physics, CERN, prophecy, anything related to prophecy I talk about. That's on dailyrenegade.com, and I'm also on YouTube, but I like using the website, because on the website I can say whatever I want. I don't have to deal with censorship issues. So there's that. I'm also on Facebook, and pretty much anywhere that people want to try to find me, they can find me there. But yeah, the main other website is dailyrenegade.com.
Ken, how do people find you?
I'm at BibleFacts.org. We do a live Monday teaching on YouTube, which is doing very well. And like you, I try to give out as much information I can, saying it the right way, so I won't get in any trouble. But we do have a private network at BibleFacts.org, so we can come there and speak freely and discuss things. So it's getting really interesting.
Yeah, it really is. Any, I know you just got a new book, and Ken has a new book, Ancient Prophecies from the Dead Sea Scrolls. You'll see more about that in other programs that we've already recorded. Any other projects you guys are working on? I mean, you guys are just, I always hate to say it's like, man, I just got done with this. But any other things in the works, Ken?
Yeah, I'm doing a couple things. This is probably the last big effort of Dead Sea Scrolls, the prophetic part anyway. There's other things to look at. But now that I've got the Church Fathers and the Dead Sea Scrolls halfway straight in my mind, I want to put together a master prophecy book, Bible prophecy, Dead Sea Scroll prophecy, and others with some charts, photos, and stuff like that. And I think that would really open up
how they coincide with each other.
Yes.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I'm going through all of my previous books, and I'm updating and expanding all of them because I write on a lot of different topics, all pretty much relating to prophecy. But I find it so fascinating. I keep up with this stuff and keep notes, and I've realized that like even the quantum physics books that I have out there, I have so much more information on that now. So I'm going to be, that's probably going to be my next project after this Forgotten Prophecies of the Dead Sea Scrolls book. I'm going to take everything that I've written about quantum physics, CERN, everything, compile it all together, add a bunch of new information that I've come up with in the years since, up to present day, and put out one expanded version of all that for people. And then you and I are working on a documentary together about the pre-trib rapture, and I'm really excited about that. So we're doing that, doing a lot of stuff here at Prophecy Watchers, and then as far as after that, the quantum physics CERN book, I don't know. We'll see. We'll see what the Lord has in store.
Amen to that. Well, this has been great. I hope you've enjoyed our conversations. Again, remind you to join us. We're going to be in Colorado Springs here in June. Ask you to join us or join us through live stream. It'll be a great time. Lots of speakers coming up. And as we know, things are changing so fast. That's why there's so many books to be written, because they almost become out of date very quickly. There's so much information happening. So appreciate you watching today. Hope you enjoyed the conversation, and we'll see you next time.
Hello and welcome to the Sharpening Report. I'm your host, Josh Peck. We have a very special returning guest today. I'm very excited for today's program. We welcome back to the show Dr. Ken Johnson. Ken, how are you doing?
Doing good. Thanks for having me back.
Oh, anytime, absolutely. Well, you got a new book out, which it's funny the way this worked out because we didn't plan this or anything. But your book and I just put out a 2-volume set on the Dead Sea Scrolls, and our books came out like at a really similar time, and both on the Dead Sea Scrolls. And I'm really excited about yours. I've read it through. It's amazing. One of your best, in my opinion. It's called Ancient Prophecies from the Dead Sea Scrolls. And that's going to be the topic of today's show for everybody that's watching. So let's start with, where you start off in the book, the Essene community, and how the discovery of the scrolls was actually predicted. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. In Isaiah chapter 29, it talks about a time when Israel comes back. And it starts off just real briefly. God is angry with Israel, and then he sides with the invading forces and obliterates Israel. Well, that has to be 70 AD. And then all of a sudden it kind of switches. It doesn't tell you it's switching, but you know how prophecy is. But all of a sudden now the Lord is bringing him back. He's angry with the other guys. They're going to attack Israel, but the Lord wipes them out like it was a bad dream, just like in a second. So it's obviously 2 separate wars. So if it was 70 AD when they left, it has to be 1948 when they come back. And then it says in that time period when they come back and the war happens and is over in just a matter of days, the old ones begin to speak out of the dust of the earth. And so if you take that literally and know the history of the scrolls, where the main professor had to wait for funding to go buy the first scroll, finally got enough money, went down to buy the first scroll, which happened to be the great Isaiah scroll where that prophecy is at, and then realized that morning he bought it, and he started to go back to the university with it and found out he couldn't get there because apparently not being into politics, he learns later that Israel declared itself to be a nation and the war started. So, I mean, you can't get closer than that within a single day. So it's an amazing story that they tell, a historical story. But with that in mind, then Isaiah 29 is telling us at a certain point, the old ones would begin to speak, and we would have at the very least history, if not other prophecy. And apparently we should pay attention to it, much like Daniel says in chapter 11 and 12, that knowledge will increase in the last days.
Yeah, it's a fascinating point in history, and a lot of people look to that time to as sort of like that's where the countdown, for prophetic things begins, and like that's where like the end, almost like that's where the end times, where like the last part of our age or something. We can look to Israel for these things. Do you agree with that? Do you think that 1940? Do you think that that time was really significant prophetically, where we could look at that and see like, okay, now we can really start counting down the time till the Lord's return?
Yeah, I think so. We can't really set a date per se, but at the same time, there's all these points of generations and jubilees. They have their own calendar system. And the church fathers, when you plug in the church fathers that are not connected at all with the Dead Sea Scrolls, but when you plug them in, they have records of the school of the prophets, the extra biblical writings, who did what. And Irenaeus actually said that the birth pangs time that Jesus talked about starts when Israel comes back. And at that point, knowledge would increase because we would see more and more prophecies fulfilled. So when we're confused at, say, 20 prophecies, and in the next 5 years, 10 of them are fulfilled, and we know exactly what the symbols mean, we should be able to understand the rest of them pretty accurately. So that was kind of a common teaching all the way through the early church.
That's absolutely fascinating. What an exciting time to be alive. And one of the most important things about the Essenes and the Dead Sea Scrolls, one of the most fascinating things to me anyway, is, and I know to you too, is the Essene calendar. And you write about that in this book, and you specifically bring up the scroll 4Q252 through 254. What is the Essene calendar, and what did you discover about it, and what if anything does it say about our time today?
Well, basically, it's the same calendar in the Bible. And of course, I can't verify this because I'm not 2,000 years old. But their concept is God gave a calendar, kind of like in Genesis when it says, observe the seventh day Sabbath and keep the cycle going. It's a calendar type thing. And so their idea is that creation started on the fourth, or the creation week rather, the fourth day of that week is when the sun, moon, and stars were created, and that's when you can start a calendar count. So their New Year's always starts on a Wednesday, and they say that the weeks were never altered. So theoretically, our Sabbath Saturday is still Saturday. So, and again, I can't really prove that, but that's what they teach. And they basically started going through beginning to beginning. They would mount years to Shemitahs, to Jubilees, to Onas, to ages, and they have this count. And the neat thing about it is they have in 11Q 13, it talks about the Melchizedekian priest, who is God incarnate, would come and pay some sort of penalty to erase the debt of our iniquities. And that somehow reconciles us to God and starts the age of grace. And it says that this time period, or the event, whatever the event is that takes this, and of course we know that to be his death on the cross, but the event is one Shemitah after the end of the ninth Jubilee of their Ona in that age. And so if you plug that into our calendar, it comes out to 32 AD, give or take a year, but so I'm not arguing dates per se, but that's pretty accurate. And that gives us an idea of the end of our age as being 2075. So we're getting ready to enter that last Jubilee in about a year and a half. So that's when time really comes up. In the book, I also have several quotes where they talk about the idea that um, at during the middle time period, just in general, not too many prophecies are fulfilled. But when you near the end of an age, especially, or sometimes even the end of a jubilee period, you have a lot more prophecies fulfilled. And so that's why I was guessing, we probably wouldn't see much of anything until at least 2 years from now. And I was wrong, happily. But there's a lot of things going on, and not just the Israeli Hamas war and Hezbollah, which are all prophesied in Scripture, and then several other things. But all these things begin a time period, and there's other things in the scrolls too that talk about that.
When we talk about jubilees, is there a difference between a jubilee and a generation, or is the concept of those the same? Is a generation 50 years?
Generally speaking, a generation is from the birth of a person to the birth of their firstborn son. And so, in other words, like if I was a king, I'd be ruling when my firstborn son was born. That begins his generation. And then, or sometimes it's actually when I take over and when he takes over. But generally, it's a generational count. So it's an unknown number of years. If I had a child when I was 15 or when I'm 50, my first, it just all depends. A jubilee is always 50 years, period. But sometimes, depending on the prophecy, there's prophecies about, like in Enoch, it talks about a 70 generational count from Enoch's time to the Messiah. And when we looked that up in Luke, that was exactly correct. Now, I did some math on it, though. I took the time period of its start and its ending, divided it by 50, or no, by 70 for the generations, just to see how many years an average generation is. And it came out to be 48.9 or something like that on average. I thought that was pretty interesting. But sometimes, though, in the text, they will use them interchangeably. And the way you can do this is you can look through the New Testament when it's talking about generations, and then go back, especially if it's quoting an Old Testament one. Go back and look that up, and then flip it over to the Septuagint and see what Greek word is used, and you'll come to find out a lot of times a jubilee is a generation.
Hmm. That's really interesting. So when Jesus says that this generation will not pass, do you think that that's just like it just means that the generation that's alive, there's not going to be a new generation that comes after that before all these things are fulfilled, or do you think that he was speaking about a specific time period?
I've always thought that he just means a general generation like that. So, in other words, there's still someone alive that saw the beginning that will see the end.
Hmm.
So, when it starts, for instance, it's not going to last 200 years because nobody would still be around. Um, but then again, what is interesting to me is the rapture hasn't happened yet. Some of the major prophecies, tribulation, Antichrist hasn't happened yet. And if it doesn't happen in the next year and a half, it'll be the same thing. It will be in that last generation or that last Jubilee.
Yeah,
So,
that
it could happen at any time, but to me, it's interesting that they would change those around, and it could mean either or.
Yeah, that makes sense, and either way we look at it, it really seems like we're heading towards that time now. So the Dead Sea Scrolls were kept by the Zadokian priesthood in Qumran. What set the Qumran beliefs apart from other beliefs at the time, say of the Pharisees and Sadducees and others?
Well, basically, they talked a lot about. Well, the idea is that there are just Jews, and basic Judaism is Judaism, the way it has always been taught. And they say they are the real original Jews with the real original theology. So, and what they teach is that there's one God, but somehow he manifests in three forms as Messiah, as Hashem, and as the Ruach HaKodesh. And they're prophets. They know the Holy Spirit very well. So they have that concept. That we have a sin nature. Messiah comes to die for our sin nature. Many texts like that. Like they talk about the fact that the teacher of righteousness came and was killed by an evil priest approximately 40 years before the destruction of the temple. So there's a whole lot of details in there. But that's their theology. And the idea is somewhere along the line, cults sprung up. And so you got Pharisees and Sadducees, and somehow the cults took over the government. So it's much like you and I being a Christian, and we believe that same story about the death, burial, and resurrection of the Messiah, and say there's some Christian cult that doesn't believe Jesus even existed and all this kind of stuff, and somehow they become president, take over the United States, and that's what we would be in that same boat then. It's like, no, we're the real Christians. These guys are cults. And that's their story. Now, of course, the Sadducees and Pharisees would tell the opposite. But what I think is interesting is in the scriptures, we're told that the Sadducees don't believe in spirits, They don't believe in the Holy Spirit. So once you're dead, you're dead. There is no life afterwards. And that's obviously not scriptural. And the Pharisees believed some of that, but not others. And so just by going by the New Testament, which I would as a Christian, I would say all those guys are wrong. And it's fascinating to me because a Jew is today, an Israeli, is taught, ignore Christians, they're a cult. The rabbis say totally different story. Okay, so that makes sense. But then you dig up the Dead Sea Scrolls, which are theoretically their great, 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 great grandfathers, that tell the story. No, we believe just like the Christians. We're waiting for it to happen just like the Christians said it did. And there's going to be an apostasy hit that's going to tell you the opposite. Well, that's the rabbis. So no matter how you look at it, there's two different sides. It's not that Christians invented the New Testament. There's always been these two sides. So you have to decide whether you're going to believe rabbinical Judaism or your great 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 grandfathers. So it's one of those things. And that is an amazing position for the Lord to put them in. You know, Paul says in Romans that eventually all Israel will be saved. So they will become a messianic nation eventually. And I see the Dead Sea Scrolls as playing a major part of that.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, for sure. People seem to be waking up more and more to it the more time goes on. You know, one question that I always get a lot, and I'm sure you do too, is why don't we see, you know, the word Essene, or why don't we see the Essenes mentioned in the Bible, or are they in the gospel somewhere under a different name? If we were to try to point out where the Essenes are in the Bible, why don't we have that word, and where would we point to show, well, this is what it means? These are the Essenes.
Yeah, well, number one, remember they said that they are the original Jews, and they tend to refer to themselves as Jews. And so that word is all the way through the New Testament. But the thing is, the word Essene is a Greek word that means healer. And that's basically what the Greek people would call them. The Hebrew people would call them the sons of Zadok, or there's the priest, that kind of thing, which is interesting if you think about it. You've got the real Zadok priests that are supposed to be ruling, and you've got this cult that comes up that takes over. So what do? They call themselves Sadducee or Zadaki, you know, trying to convince people they are the real Zadok priests and not. So you see that kind of stuff in there. So other than that, it's not mentioned a whole lot because I think mainly when you give a name to someone, you're doing it because there's a problem. We're all Jews. We're waiting for Messiah. That's all we need to know, except that nut over there. So we got to give him a name, you know, a Sadducee, a Pharisee, a Samaritan. Samaritans might be nice people, but they only took like the first 5 books of the Old Testament. They reject everything else. Okay, they're nuts. You know, it just, so we're going to call them this name, we're going to call them that name, not in a bad way, but just to label them. So you've got this, but you've got a lot of Essenes. For instance, in Acts chapter, I think it's chapter 13, it's when the prophets came down from Antioch to lay hands on Barnabas and Paul and anoint them for ministry. It says that there were 3 major guys that came down. One of them was in our Bible, it says Manaen, who was the Manaen who was with Herod in his household. Okay, so that tells us everything we need to know. The Hebrew way of saying that name is Menachem, and there's a whole history of Menachem the Essene, how he ran the Sanhedrin, and then when they began to apostatize, he said, no, I'm keeping the original teaching and I leave. And so they call him a heretic. He leaves and kind of disappears. And that's when Hillel takes over. So, you know, Hillel and Shammai, 2 of the main famous rabbis. But what happens is, of course, he's a Christian. He's waiting. And he comes down at this point. He's got to be at least in his 90s or 100, 102, something like that at least. To anoint Paul, coming down from Antioch all the way to Jerusalem. And it's interesting because they're called Essenes, meaning healers, but they have this concept that if you do the herbal medicine and you have a simple lifestyle and you dedicate yourself to the Lord, you normally live to be 120. That's just kind of standard. Almost all of them do. The Pharisees and Sadducees might live to be 70 or 80 if they have a really cushy, you know, place and lots of good food and that kind of stuff. The average Gentile lived to be about 60 back in that day, is from what we understand. So you've got this 90-year-old guy hopping on a donkey and coming all the way down here to anoint Paul. And it's just interesting to see that. He's got to have an Essene diet. He's got to have a long lifespan. He's filled with the Holy Spirit. So obviously he's a Christian. Otherwise he wouldn't be filled with the Spirit and still prophesying. And so that goes along with what the church fathers say about after the coming of Messiah. Doesn't matter if you're Jew or Gentile, but you have to be a believer in Messiah to experience the gifts. So that's just one example, but there's others in there, and I think we get stuck on the names sometime. Scribes, by the way, is there's a couple of different kinds of scribes. Some scribes might be they might be referring to Essenes. Other scribes are the ones that just write court documents, scribes. And then there was a scribal group or denomination that I thought was fascinating because the Pharisees said we're going to follow this oral Torah. And the Essenes would say oral Torah is junk because we have the writings of the patriarchs. So we're following patriarchal history in the Old Testament. The scribes, on the other hand, said we're not going to take sides in that. So we're not going to look at any history, any theology. We're just going to read the Bible and take wild guesses on what we think it means. And I thought it's interesting when you look at it like that, Jesus was always yelling at the scribes and the Pharisees, they're hypocrites. And you can see why. It's like you're trying to teach real history, teach everything correctly, but you don't want to look at history and add it to the Bible or anything like that. So it's really interesting to see. And we kind of have that parallel today in our society. People will say, well, let's not look at the Dead Sea Scrolls. That's not in the Bible, but it's mentioned. It's part of history. It's kind of important.
Yeah, I definitely agree, and yeah, it is important. And also, if it was included in the Bible would be so big nobody would have the time to read it. I mean, it's already hard enough to even get Christians to read the Bible with the length. Imagine if it was twice or three times the size. Something that the Dead Sea Scrolls do, which is really interesting, is they provide commentaries on biblical texts that we're familiar with, and in some of those commentaries, there's a lot of prophecy that can be found. And you dedicated a whole section of your book to prophetic commentaries. I'd love to go through some of these and just have you talk about what you found in these commentaries that really stuck out. So let's start with the Genesis commentary. What's in there and what stuck out to you prophetically?
Well, number one, they go through and they give us chapter 7 of Genesis, the flood account and everything, but they will plug in the actual dates. Our Genesis says that the flood occurred on the 17th of the second month in the 600th year of Noah's life. So that's ER 1656 on the calendar. But they would actually go so far as to say, well, that day was Sunday, and it was this, and it was that. So they give you all the days of the week, all that kind of stuff. If their calendar is correct, and that's the one that has always been used, those dates would be absolutely correct. So it's really neat to see that kind of stuff. And when you look at prophecies and comments and other scriptures, that corroborates it. So, for instance, I've always wondered when Jesus said something happens and 3 days later this other thing happened. Why does it say 3 days later? Because I have no clue when it started. There's no way I could figure out when it happened. It's a waste of time. There's no way to figure it out. If you use the Dead Sea Scroll calendar, you'll know exactly what day it is. If it's a festival or if it's close to a Sabbath or whatever, it just clicks. And so it makes sense because the scripture wouldn't add other stuff like that. But there's prophecies about the Messiah, the one that would do different things. And we look at those as Christians, like in Genesis, and say, well, that's obviously a prophecy about the Messiah. Modern day Judaism would say, no, it means something else. And you got the Dead Sea Scrolls saying, nah, it means Messiah. And that's what's fascinating about all of these things.
Yeah, I agree. The calendar to me is really fascinating because you can take that calendar and apply it from Genesis to Revelation. I mean, even the prophetic day counts fit within this calendar. Since it came up, I should mention too for people at home, if you want a print version of this calendar, Dr. Ken Johnson and I do have that available. You can go to his website, BibleFacts.org, or you can go to DailyRenegade.com to get that, or you can just click on the link in the description below. But it's the Dead Sea Scroll calendar with all of the festivals and feasts. Ken put the whole thing together. All I did was just put it into print form. But it also has our regular calendar attached to it, so you can compare like today's date and see if today falls on a feast day, or you can, if a major event happens in Israel, if they start a war or something, or well, they don't really start wars, but if they, if a battle happens or something, you can you can look at that date and see, okay, this is on this festival. And it also has all the new festivals too that most of us don't know about. In Leviticus, we have 7 of them mentioned, but in the Dead Sea Scrolls, there are as many as 12 from what it appears, which actually, it kind of makes more sense because there's prophecies about like time, and half a time. And that is, that's the word Moedim. It means a festival cycle. Well, if it's only 7, how do you have half of 7? It's either going to be 3/4 or 4/3. You can't really have half. If there's 12, you can have exactly half. So for that, if anybody's interested, you can just click on the link in the description below, or go to BibleFacts.org for Ken's website, or go to DailyRenegade.com for mine. And the proceeds go to help both of our ministries. We split everything down the middle, so you're supporting two great ministries with that. Okay, so. And these commentaries are really fascinating because they do talk a lot about their time and prophecies they were looking forward to, but also some in our time too. What are some of the things that stuck out to you about our time from there's a bunch of commentaries. We wouldn't have time to go through all of them. There's probably at least a dozen or more here in your book. And the way the book's laid out for everybody at home, it's really easy to read. Like Ken will actually, he puts the actual section of the Dead Sea Scrolls and then provides his own commentary and kind of helps explain. So it's really easy to read and really informative. But what are some of the ones that really stuck out to you about our time? What's happening now and what we might be looking forward to in the near future?
Well, in the commentary section, there's some really interesting ones. For instance, I remember going through seminary and we looked at the Valley of Dry Bones, and there were several theories on what it meant. Most of us thought it was prophecy, not resurrection. And some people said, well, it could be 537 BC coming back from Babylon, or 1948, or both. It could just be symbolic, that kind of thing. In the commentary in Ezekiel, though, they have a section on Ezekiel 37. And basically, they have 2 separate events where the same thing happens. One is when Israel comes back filled with the Spirit, and the other one is when they come back not filled with the Spirit. And so that's pretty obvious because they talk about the fact when they come back under Ezra, Nehemiah, that kind of stuff, they have 11Q13, this concept that the Messiah is God incarnate that dies for their sins. So they're obviously filled with the Spirit. They're following that kind of thing. And when Israel comes back in 1948, they're not messianic. So when you look at that, it's pretty obvious, according to that text, our Ezekiel 37 only has them coming back with not filled with the Spirit. So number one, that tells us that Ezekiel chapter 37 in our Bibles is specifically talking about 1948, period. And I thought that was fascinating. Anytime you can isolate something like that and know for sure, then you begin to see other things instead of speculating on what it might be, or it may prove something else to be wrong. So it's kind of neat to see that, this whole concept, and there's a lot of other things. For instance, in Habakkuk chapter 2, Paul quotes that in 3 places in the New Testament, and he's explaining how the just are saved by faith, not sacrifices, but faith in the Messiah. And he seems to indicate in Galatians that that's how Abraham was saved, by trusting in what the Messiah would do when he comes, however he fixes it. And so modern rabbis would say, no, it's got nothing to do with the Jesus or anything like that. It's just faith in God, that God will take care of things. Well, the commentary specifically says the just live by faith in what the teacher of righteousness will do when he comes. So they make it very, very clear. It can't be faith in potatoes or your church or whatever. It's faith in the Messiah. So again, for us as Christians, it's very clear, but it's an incredible witness to Jews. The just live by faith. You can't live by the law of Moses. I mean, you need to follow that if you're in that culture. But that's not how salvation is based. It's by trusting Messiah. Well, who is Messiah? He's the one that was killed 40 years before the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. The one that did these other things, the one that is bringing salvation, that is God incarnate, that does all these things. So it's repeated over and over again. And there is a ton of first coming prophecies, extra biblical ones, for instance, and then the commentaries on those. And then there are some that are for the second coming, which I find fascinating.
Yeah, I definitely want to talk about that because I find that absolutely fascinating too. Before we do, we are going to take a quick break. So everybody just hold on the line. We'll be right back with Ken Johnson. I would ask that you go visit dailyrenegade.com and become a member today. Not only do you get early access to full videos, but there's a lot of things I just can't put out on YouTube for fear that they'll delete videos or delete the entire channel, and I can't put the channel at risk. There are certain things, and those of you who have followed me for a while know, there are certain things that I've made documentaries about that I cannot mention on YouTube, or my entire channel will get removed. A ministry that I previously worked for had this happen recently because of exactly this. So, and I've had this happen multiple times too. So this is why I created Daily Renegade. It's a place where we don't have to worry about censorship. You can go, you can watch all the videos, you can watch the full videos of everything. And there's even a community tab that works pretty much exactly like Facebook without the censorship. So members of Daily Renegade, we can all communicate with each other. You can post, you can put pictures up, you can make your own account. It's really exactly like Facebook. There's just no censorship. Now, again, I do run the site. If I see somebody cussing somebody out, I'm going to remove them. But so far, I have not had one problem with trolls because, let's face it, trolls are pathetic, right? They're not going to spend their own money to go and troll somebody. They'll just do it for free on YouTube. So we'll leave the filth with YouTube. At dailyrenegade.com, we're actually creating something really nice. So the video section works exactly like YouTube. It looks really, really similar. It has the same layout. You get your own profile. You can favorite videos. You can share things. You can comment. I mean, it has the same layout as YouTube. It just does not have the censorship. And it's the same with the community tab. So at dailyrenegade.com, yes, there is a membership fee because there has to be. I'm not rich. I didn't get into full-time ministry to become rich, you know. So I can't afford to do it all on my own. So there is a membership, but that goes towards keeping Daily Renegade afloat. But also it helps with what we're trying to do. We want to make a phone app and a TV app so that Daily Renegade will be even easier to access. Right now, you can go on your phone and just go dailyrenegade.com and it works great. It works beautifully now. We had problems with an earlier website that we went through a different service. We went through Wix. And we got rid of that. That's done. So if you're happening to view this and you're thinking, oh, I remember that site from 2 years ago and it was awful, I couldn't do anything. Please, I'm asking you, give us another chance because we have fixed all that. We fixed all the junk. It was expensive to do, but it's because of people supporting Daily Renegade, getting memberships and even donating that we're able to do that. So it works great now, and now we want to take it to the next step. We want to make a phone app, and we want to make a TV app. So dailyrenegade.com is where you can get that. It's only $10 a month or $100 a year, and if you can do it, I suggest doing the $100 a year because it's cheaper in the long run. Essentially, you get 2 months for free. I also want to say, too, that we're still collecting donations. So many of you know the situation. I'll run through it very briefly. Two main things. One, 2 weeks before I got the job offer here for Prophecy Watchers, my wife and I had bought a house in Illinois. And once we got the job offer here, we knew it was a calling from God. We knew it. And so we had to take it. And it's great. I mean, I love working at Prophecy Watchers. I love everybody there. Feels like home, feels like a family. And it is a perfect fit for us. But the problem is we are renting a house here in Oklahoma, but we still have a house that we're trying to sell in Illinois. By the way, if you're in the Decatur, Illinois area and you're looking for a really nice 4-bedroom house, let me know. JoshPeckDisclosure@gmail.com. It's for sale now. But but in the meantime, we don't know how long that house is going to sell. And anybody who knows anything about the economy knows this is a really bad time to try to sell a house. So it's been very difficult financially. It's been financially straining, and especially since Illinois got hit with some storms, and we had to pay to fix some damages there and stuff. We've had to put a lot of money into it. So while we're paying for a mortgage there, we're paying for rent at this house. So basically, we got two huge payments. And I don't know how long that's going to last. The second our house sells, I will tell everybody on here, okay, we're good. You don't have to donate. Well, you don't have to donate at all, but we no longer need donations for our living situation. Um, so we are accepting donations for that. We're also accepting because we have a big family. We have 5 kids, and we're a single income house. Christina stays at home, takes care of the kids, homeschools them, works really, really hard. And then I do my ministry work at Prophecy Watchers, and then on my off time on that, I work on Daily Renegade stuff. And anything that I make from Prophecy Watchers and Daily Renegade, that's it for our entire family. So once our house sells, it's going to be fine, but we just don't know how long that's going to last. And if that lasts months and stuff, we need some kind of savings. And whatever savings we had before we put into the first house, because we thought, well, there's a whole story behind that, why we had to buy the house otherwise we weren't going to have a place to live for much longer. And there's a whole thing. Nobody was unfair to us or anything like that. Like, just the basic story was, I went to go work for Zach Drew for a while, for about 9 months, and at the time, I wasn't in the best. Just at the time, we were already dealing with financial problems because of our son's health care, which I'm going to get into in a minute. But so Zach said, well, I actually have a house that I'm trying to sell. You can stay in it rent free up until like this time. But by this time, we need to find out if you're going to buy it or if you're going to live somewhere else, or we'll need to figure out what to do, because I won't be able to afford to just do that forever. And so that's what it was. So Zach helped us out a lot. But it got to that point, and again, this was 2 weeks before the Prophecy Watchers job offer. So I said, okay, we'll just buy the house from you. We'll make it really easy. You've been really generous. You've been helping us out. We don't have any other place around here where we can rent that can support all of us. So we'll just buy it from you. So we went through that whole process and bought the house, and then it was like 2 weeks after that I got the Prophecy Watchers job offer. And but again, like, I didn't move to Prophecy Watchers till months after that. So either way, even if I had gotten the job offer before buying the house, I still would have had to buy the house unless I absolutely wanted to financially ruin my very good friend Zach Drew, and there was just no way I was going to do that to him. So either way, I was going to have to. I was going to buy the house. Zach never told me I had to, but in my mind, I had to, because if I didn't, I would have totally messed up a really good friend, and I wouldn't have had there was no other place for me and the family to go, so it just wouldn't have worked. Anyway, so that's just kind of a brief rundown of why we're in the situation we're in. Prophecy Watchers has helped out a lot, but again, we don't know how long this is going to last. So until the house sells, I have to keep bringing it up and say, hey, if you feel led and if you want to donate, that would be extremely helpful. Best place is paypal.me/Josh Peck Disclosure. If you don't want to do that, I do have a Cash App. It's $Josh Scott Peck. If you want to mail in something, a couple of people have mailed in checks just addressed to me, to the Prophecy Watchers building. I don't have the exact address. I think it's I don't know what their PO box is, but I think it's on their website. So if you just want to go to prophecywatchers.com and look where to actually send in, and look for a PO box where to send in, or an address. I know the physical address of the building, but I honestly don't know if that's been made public, and I don't want to make it public if it hasn't. So I'm not going to do that. Also, We're still accepting donations for my son's healthcare. Very brief synopsis: he had cancer for years. We took him to St. Jude's, got it cured. But the chemo destroyed his immune system, and he's got a lot of long lasting health issues because of that. So to reverse those health issues, Christina actually got her degree because of this whole thing in natural health and medicine, and so we're going the all natural route. But that stuff is really expensive. Those treatments, those supplements, and I'm not talking about just supplements off of the shelf of Walmart. A lot of that's garbage and it's not even real. But to actually get the real stuff that your body like needs to heal, it's so expensive, and insurance does not cover it at all. So, and there's also medical treatments and things like that he needs. Very, very expensive, and we're having to pay out of pocket for that. So again, for my family, I don't like having to ask all the time. And I'm not ever going to impose on you that you have to donate. You don't. You really don't. I would love it if you'd at least pray, though. That anybody can do that. If you're watching this video, you can pray. At least pray that, and God has been providing. He's been doing great. But, just pray that continues. Pray for our wisdom. Pray for Nathan's health. Pray for our house to sell. There's a lot of things you can pray for that would help. I don't love having to bring this up every single time, but for my family, absolutely, I'm going to do that. It's especially if you're a man, it's not easy to ask for help. It's not easy to just put your personal details out there and admit when you need help. It's not easy, but I'll do anything for my family, and I'm sure you would too. So yeah, every single time I do this, every single time I get comments, I get emails, I get people that get annoyed that I'm even bringing it up. And I'll get comments that say, well, the gospel should be free. The gospel is free. I'm not selling the gospel. I'm not telling you that you have to give anything. You don't. But if you feel led, not just for me, for my family, for my kids, if you feel led, it would be incredibly helpful. And I'm not going to promise that you're going to get anything from it. That's up to God. I'm never going to be the kind of guy that says, sow a seed and if you do this, God will reward you. I don't know what God's going to do. And that shouldn't be why you give anyway. You should never give to get a reward for yourself. If you're giving because you're expecting God to reward you in some way, I'd rather you just not give at all, because that's like spiritually dangerous territory for you to be in. And I would suggest getting some actual good, solid foundational teaching of the teachings of Jesus and what he means when he says when he tells us to give with a cheerful heart and all that stuff. You don't expect things in return. We know that we're getting rewards in heaven. We know all that, but you shouldn't expect anything in return. All it is it's a gift that would really help us out a lot. And if anything, I mean, it helps. It makes it a little easier for me to make these videos. If I don't constantly have this stuff on my mind or have to plan out what we're going to do financially for the next bill, because all that stuff takes time. So I mean, if anything, you'll get more videos, but I'm not gonna say that any promises come from any of that. It's just a nice thing that would help us, and we'd appreciate it. But again, do it if the Lord leads you. If not, no worries. Just pray. If you can pray, that'd be great. So again, PayPal.me/Josh Peck Disclosure, or Cash App $ Josh Scott Peck. And we have not set a P.O. box up yet, but we will very soon. I actually just keep forgetting about it because we have so much stuff to do. We have so many things day to day that we have to focus on. We are still in that transition period, but we're getting through it. And actually, it's really been great. I do have some other links and things in the description below. I did recently take part in a webinar that's available, or will be available, at the end of May, I believe, at paulbegleyprophecy.com, and I talked about upcoming magnetic pole shifts, what that might have to do with prophecy, talked a little bit about geographic pole shifts, how all of this relates to Bible prophecy, a lot of revelation in there. So I'd suggest checking out that webinar, paulbegleyprophecy.com. There's also an Orlando Prophecy Summit that's on demand right now. And if you use the promo code PECKOrlando24, all caps, all one word, and then you'll have full access to all videos and speakers. This is a Prophecy Watchers conference. And for more information on that, you can go to OrlandoProphecySummit.com or ProphecyWatchers.com. Also, if you haven't had a chance, check out Cornerstone Asset Metals. The economy is not great, and the value of our dollar is dropping by the day. So what we should do is invest in something that's more stable, like silver and gold. But the problem is there's a lot of scammers out there. There's a lot of people you can't trust, even people calling themselves Christians that you can't trust because they mark up their prices. Cornerstone doesn't do that. And if you look at any interview that I have on my YouTube channel and at dailyrenegade.com with Terry Saka, look at any of his interviews. He's a prophecy guy. He's a Nephilim guy like us. You know, he knows all this stuff, and he treats his business as a ministry. He's doing this as a service for brothers and sisters in Christ, especially when their retirement, their 401k, you know, your investments, even just your savings are in danger. So go to cornerstoneassetmetals.com, tell them that we sent you, and you can get a free report. You can ask questions. They're not salesmen. They're not going to be pushy with you. You can talk to them about Nephilim if you want to. You know, they're knowledgeable. They know what they're talking about, and they're not going to scam you. I've been working with them for years. I don't promote very many companies on this channel because of specifically that. I've got to actually really know and believe that and know firsthand that it's a solid company because I don't want to put all of you at risk. And I fully believe that about Cornerstone. We've talked a little bit about prophecy. We do have a Dead Sea Scroll prophecy calendar, a print calendar that you can put on your wall that tells the regular Gregorian date that we go through, and then has the Dead Sea Scroll prophetic calendar that I talk a lot about in my upcoming books, but also talked about in Lost Prophecies of Qumran. So if you want a print version of that, the link is in the description below. Okay, so I think that's it. All the donation stuff, everything. And again, I apologize that takes a long time to get through sometimes, but again, I'm doing it, especially the donation stuff. I'm doing it for my family. See how fast I whipped through the rest of it? Because that's more, hey, if you want a calendar, buy a calendar. Great. You know, it does help support me, my family, my ministry, helps support Ken Johnson's ministry as well. You know, if you want to trade your 401k or your retirement into silver, I think it's a very, very, very smart thing to do. I think you should do that. But, you know, again, it's just what won't you do for your family? If I have to deal with some mean comments of people saying that, oh, he's just money grubbing, and no, I'm not. You don't have to give me anything. You don't got to buy anything. I'm still going to be putting free information out on YouTube. But if I have to deal with that, and then the good-hearted people of you who feel God calling you to give, and you do give, and that helps my family, of course I'll go through that. It's very, very minor persecution, you know, compared to stuff that other Christians are going through today. It's very, very minimal. All I have to do is just not read the comments, which typically I don't on YouTube. But that's the reason. It's just I'll do anything for my family, and this is one way that'll help. So okay, let's get back into it. Okay, we are back. I want to ask about some of the second coming prophecies. Before I do, though, where can people pick up your book and follow you online?
All my books are on Amazon. If you go to my website, biblefacts.org, you'll be able to click on links and buy them directly from Amazon. Saves me the trouble of shipping and everything. So we've got, I think, 34 books total. On the Dead Sea Scrolls section, I think we have about 6 or 7. But I'm at biblefacts.org. And on Monday nights, I teach on YouTube. So I have a YouTube channel. Again, the links are all there on the website. So we're doing really good. We're going through studying Enoch at the moment. We're almost finished with that, looking at some of those prophecies.
Excellent. And if anybody's interested in mine, the best place to get them is prophecywatchers.com. By the time this airs on YouTube, they should have the books in. They just put in order with me, so I think it takes a week or two for them to get them. But if you're viewing this at dailyrenegade.com, I'm not sure that the books are there yet. They are on Amazon, but if you want, if you can wait, I would suggest that you wait and get them at Prophecy Watchers, because why support Jeff Bezos when you can support an awesome prophecy ministry and help them out? I will say, though, if you want the audiobook or the Kindle, I think that is only available on Amazon for mine. So, and then my new books, it's a 2-volume set. It's Forgotten Prophecies of the Dead Sea Scrolls. So that's up there as well, which reminds me, I gotta put up a banner on my website for that as well. Well, okay, we're going to go to members only, and then I want to talk about prophecies relating to the second coming and then some other stuff as well. So again, for all of you out there, I said it in the break, but I'll just repeat it again. If you want to become a member, it's $10 a month or $100 a year at dailyrenegade.com, which goes to support what we're doing at Daily Renegade. We do that because of censorship issues. I already dealt with all that in the break, so I'm not going to rehash that. So we will, if you're a member, you don't have to do anything. Just keep watching. And if you are viewing on YouTube or Rumble, don't forget to subscribe. And if you believe you're subscribed, double check, because I've had a lot of people contact me and say that YouTube has been unsubscribing them from my channel. So double check, make sure you turn the bell on for all notifications. And until next time, take care and God bless. Okay, members only. Thank you all so much for being part of the family here at Daily Renegade. Hope you're enjoying it. Let's continue. Let's just get right back into it. So in the first half of the show, you mentioned that they have a lot of prophecies about the first coming and even some prophecies about the second coming. What prophecies did you find that really helped clear up some things that we read about in the Bible? Because of course there's a lot in the Bible about the second coming as well. But we as Christians, we all seem to have different ideas of how to interpret these. Do the Dead Sea Scrolls help us understand a little clearer what to expect with the second coming of Christ?
Yeah, it's basically in a lot of our theologies, there's a lot of debate. First off, they were what I would call dispensationalist. Maybe not in the same way that we are today, but they basically have this concept that they're like, for instance, the Passover ritual. There was a Melchizedekian version. Moses changed it into what we consider the Passover Seder. It's supposed to change again when the Messiah comes to set up the age of grace. And then it's supposed to change again when we have the millennial reign. And they don't, speculate much on what it might be, but just to see that the differences that right now we're priests, we have to fulfill the law of Moses. When the age of grace comes, this will be set aside. We'll be doing something different. And so they understand that kind of stuff. Um, they talk a lot about the first coming prophecies because number one, that's important to them. But that drifts over into the second coming prophecies a lot. For instance, one of the slams against them is to say apparently they were just a small Jewish cult because they thought they were going to take over the Roman Empire and rule the world, and Rome squished them. So they're gone, they're dead. We don't need to worry about it. And you might get that at first glance by looking at their text because they talk about triumphing over Rome. But it's very, very clear that they're talking about a revived Roman Empire of some sort. And it's not them that are taking over, it's the Messiah establishing the kingdom. So we're very clearly talking about 2,000 years later. So you look at this stuff, and people are really easily wanting to dismiss things. A lot of people will say, well, the teacher of righteousness is probably the guy that founded the group. Couldn't be. If he died 40 years before the temple was destroyed, he'd be 300 years old. So unless, of course, that's Messiah or something, there's no way to get around that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
But they have a lot
yeah.
of things as far as Rome is concerned. They talk about how Rome is this empire, and it may morph and change places and ways it does something, but it's still the ancient empire. And we still have that today. I remember being taught in the seminary Rome died out in 476. Come to find out they were split, as prophesied in Daniel, and that Roman Empire ended in 1453, 1,000 years later. And then come to find out, according to the text in some of the scrolls, they continue so that's the Ottoman Empire was a continuation of that. So the Roman Empire, religion-wise, went from pagan to Christian to Muslim to probably something else. So we've got to look at those things closely. So then it fizzles out in 1917. There's an attempted revival in 1945 with World War II. And then Israel comes on the scene. So it's all perfectly succinct, I think. But they talk about this. There's going to be, right before the establishment of kingdom, there's going to be a 7-year period. No more, no less, exactly 7 years. There's going to be an evil Gentile king. We're not told from where, in the scrolls anyway, but this evil Gentile king is going to rule, and he's going to rule through a group of nations. We're not told 10 or any number, but just a group of nations. So it's delegated authority somehow. And he's going to try to attack and destroy Israel. The Messiah comes and destroys him, sets up a kingdom. So that's really specific. And there's some dateline prophecies set in there that we're not too sure, how that works exactly. But there's a lot of things like that. So most of it's corroborating what we know from Daniel, from the New Testament, from the book of Revelation. And then there's, it goes on and gives other details like that. Like, for instance, this Gentile king apparently is insane. He calls himself the Son of God, and the God incarnate, stuff like that, which is actually what Paul said he would do also, and talks about a rebuilt temple and things like that. So there's a lot of interesting details.
Yeah, for sure. And that 7 year period part really fascinated me. Because I know you have done your own translations on these. Is that right?
Hmm.
Yeah, which is awesome. And
Yes.
I love the way that you do it, because it's really easy to read. I have a few different translations, and they vary in some are like really difficult because it's almost old English words that they'll use,
Yeah.
and then some are a little more modernized, so it's easy. And
And other times it depends on how they translate it too.
yeah.
I was talking online one time and I was talking about how they constantly talk about the age of grace that's coming, because Paul uses that term, and it's obviously the same thing. And so this guy calls in and says, I don't know where you're getting this, because I have all of it, and none of it anywhere says anything about age of grace or anything like that. So where are you getting this? And I said, well, it depends on, you're translating it. They'll probably say, I'm trying to put a Christian spin on it, and they're trying to put a non-Christian spin on it. But for instance, the words are, it could be translated age or kingdom, and then grace is unmerited favor. So it's either grace or favor, however you want to say it. And that's not really wrong or right. So you'll probably see it as kingdom of favor, which to me makes no sense. Kingdom of favor, age of grace makes much more sense. Anyway, and it was funny though, because he said, oh, kingdom of favor, is that what you're talking about? Yeah, that's all through there. And I'm like, that's my point. So there's a lot of things. Teacher of righteousness, who knows who that might be? Well, let them explain who it is.
Yeah, excuse me. Yeah, yeah. That's why I really like your translations. They're easy to read, and they do fit in, because yeah, you're right. A lot of the translations I have, it's almost like they're trying to get away from the Christian stuff that's really all throughout the Dead Sea Scrolls, and that can alter the translation. There's a couple of scrolls that I know a lot of people are curious about, and I've wondered about too. And I'm curious to get your take, because I don't know how to read the original languages, and you do. So I have to go based on just how they're translated. So, like for example, when I read through the War Scroll, and I have a chapter about it in my book, but there's a lot that I can't make heads or tails out of, because I don't know if it's talking about Armageddon or a different war, because sometimes it's like there's 6 years of preparation, and there's but then in other places it seems like they're talking about like 40 years of this war. How would you explain the War Scroll? Like, what are we looking at? Is this like a patchwork of different things, or is this supposed to be one war, or what's being talked about in the War Scroll?
It could be. I didn't put it in this book. It's one of the few things left to work on, but it's not corrupted as in the form of having holes in the text per se. So it's pretty consistent together, but without an ending and a beginning, the commentary, it's kind of hard to tell. So we're talking about, my guess is we're talking about a war situation.
Mm-hmm.
So, for instance, in modern Israel times, which has nothing to do with the War Scroll, but in modern Israel, they've had an ongoing problem with Syria and with Hamas and stuff like that. And you could say it's been one long war, or you could say, well, there's actually been 4 wars over 80 years that, here, 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 and here. But those are just skirmishes. They're part of the same problem. And the whole concept is at the end of this thing, the Messiah will finally eradicate this, and we will have peace on earth for 1,000 years. So I think that's where we're going. But some of the texts are kind of hard to pinpoint which exactly a time period, because some of them may have happened and others definitely have not. and they may be directly related and may not. So it's a lot easier once something happens to say, hey, that, so many days from this date was that date, and that is what happened. That's got to be correct. So that's the main idea behind that. But the war scroll is kind of confusing.
Yeah, I agree. Another one and I know you didn't write about this one either in this book, but another one that I was curious about, and I wrote a section in my book about it, but this one I don't know what to do with this one either. The Temple Scroll, which is interesting, but when you actually do the measurements and stuff, it doesn't seem to match the end of Ezekiel with that temple. Doesn't seem to match any of the other temples. What's your main takeaway from the Temple Scroll? What do you think we're looking at there? Is this something prophetic? Is this something that was planned but never built? What's your take?
Yeah, the temple, like the New Jerusalem text or the actual
Right.
temple scroll?
Oh, right,
Okay.
right. Yeah,
Yeah,
sometimes I get those mixed. Yeah, sorry.
yeah. The New Jerusalem text, talk a lot about it, and sometimes some of the texts sound a lot like the description in Revelation,
Yeah.
but then they are different. So it is interesting to see, and I'm not sure why there'd be differences. I would trust the New Testament first,
Mhm.
and these could be commentaries. Some of the scrolls have been. I forget exactly the word for it, but when you're writing out your own stuff and you're like a student, and you're writing your first trimester type stuff. So in that case, we could have something that's got typos in it. For instance, I remember in one place in Justin Martyr, which is church father, not scroll, but he said something about the Antichrist comes and attacks and rules for 2.5 years. Now, there's another place, several other places, where he says 3.5 years. So it's just got to be a typo, for instance. So a lot of times when it comes to numbers, a lot of things get messed up. The stories are usually perfect, but the numbers kind of get confused. So I'm not sure exactly how to do that either. I think we'll
Yeah.
figure it out eventually.
Yeah, I think so too. If not on this side of the second coming of Christ, on the other side of it, and I can't wait for that. So to end here, let's talk about you have the Gaza plague. We hear a lot about stuff going on in Israel right now. And like you mentioned, you would have expected this to happen a couple years from now when we were in our final Jubilee, but it seems like it happened early. Is there anything in the Bible or in the scrolls that explains what's happening right now in Israel, how this is going to pan out, and what we can expect in the Middle East in the next, say, few years or so?
There might be. There's a couple of things. Like there's one place that talks about a plague coming from Gaza, and there's other scrolls and Bible passages even that talk about Hamas being a government structure in the Gaza Strip, and all these other things that are going on. The prophecies of the wars that happen with Israel and southern Lebanon, and even Iran. Iran is mentioned in some of the scrolls too, not just in Jeremiah 49. But pulling all that together, one of the things I thought was interesting is there is a text that talks about a 70-year period. And at first you're looking at that going, well, it must be the Babylonian period. But it doesn't seem to be like that. It seems to be talking about Israel comes back, and then there is a 70-year period and something happens. It's got something to do with a breach of contract. And so I started looking at it, and it's like, well, if it was 1948, that's over and nothing happened. So I don't know what that would be. So I just kind of keep going down to see what happens. One of the things I thought fascinating was the idea that Israel comes back as a very small state in the middle, and everybody around, they have no authority technically around them. But then as they expand, and this is the way it happened back when they first came into the land, they were told that I'm not giving you the whole thing because the wild animals would just go crazy. And so you need to expand slowly over a few hundred years. And so the same kind of thing is going on here. So they expand. And one of the wars after 1948 was the Suez Crisis. And the Suez Crisis was a thing in Egypt. They got it fixed and got done with it. But Egypt controlled Gaza at the time, and then Israel took it over. Well, as soon as the problem was over, they pretty much just gave it back for political pressure. But technically, if it's their land and they were able to control it, the bottom line is you don't give it back. So that would definitely be a breach of contract. So that would have to be fixed somewhere along the line. And there's been a couple times where they've taken it over, and then they've given it Ariel Sharon in 2005, I believe, gave them independence, and then we had all this problem start. So one of the things I thought was interesting is that Suez Crisis was 1956. So 1956 plus 70 years is 2026. The Hamas war started in 23, and now it's 24. So the bottom line is they're saying there's no way it would be over this year. Well, maybe if it was just, everybody stayed out of it and they could just finish this one war. But if Hezbollah is going to hop in and or Iran or anything else, it's not going to be this year. So that would mean they're kind of expecting or hoping it to be done somewhere in the middle of 2025, somewhere like that. But if it's even 6 months further, that would be 2026. So it would be really interesting to me to see if 1956 was the mistake and 2026 is a permanent solution. That would be fascinating. And of course, the 70-year count might be something else. Another thing that they did wrong is in 1967, they took back the Temple Mount, and then they promptly handed it back again. So 70 years from 1967 would be 2047, I think it is, or 37, something like that. That's a long ways out, though. I'd rather the rapture and everything happen quicker. But you never know. I mean, I remember my parents thinking it can't get worse than this, and that was back in the early 80s. And now it's been 40 some years since then. So anyway, but there's things like that in there. So the idea of a Gentile king, and one of the things I thought was interesting was in the book of Revelation. It talks about, remember the two beasts, one's
Yeah.
from the land, one's from the sea. And Revelation actually says the sea is all the different peoples, nations, the Gentiles, basically. And that makes you think the land beast is probably Israel. If it's all these people and then one people, it'd have to be Israel and Gentiles. So that's fine. But the interesting thing about it was in the Dead Sea Scrolls, it's talking about these things, and it was saying when people come up out of the sea, specifically, it is the Gentile groups, but the Gentile groups are always headed by somebody. And in the way they interpret it is it's headed by Rome. So there'd be a revived Roman Empire of something. And the guy heading this is like an Antichrist figure or something along those lines. So to say it's Gentile and it's Antichrist and it's Rome and it's from the Gentile nations and it's a large coalition coming against, Israel. And apparently there's a false prophet type person in Israel, if you interpret it like that. So it gives us to me anyway, a slight twist or more information on maybe how to interpret Revelation. We might look a little closer of these things, but the wars are fascinating. And one of the things that I've always thought about also is this with the Nephilim idea. I've always said because the old texts talk about the Nephilim being a problem, they all got wiped out in the flood, and there never was another incursion. We're done. And the question is, well, then where did they come from in Canaan? Well, the history text say you get a human being reading the text on how they did their experiments, you recreate it, and all of a sudden now you got giants in Canaan. So it's a human recreation type thing. But so there's texts that talk about the technology at least coming back, and we're warned about, Nephilim type medicine. So in the end times, you'll have doctors that want to change your genes to fix all the problems. And that's where you're supposed to stop and say, no, it's not just a pill, an antibiotic or something. You're talking about fundamentally changing who I am. And that begins to get into Nephilim concepts. And so one of the things was interesting was this one scroll, I think it's 4Q 530.
Yep. Yeah, you have it titled as End Time Nephilim. Yeah.
Yeah. It's there's a lot of right before the flood, a lot of them had dreams of a coming flood and everything was destroyed. In this one, though, it's a little different because everything is destroyed, but there are gardeners that come and snip out some of the roots, and the roots make it through and survive until a fire comes and destroys them. So that would be second coming. So we have the possibility, not even necessarily Nephilim like before, but at the very least, something from them, the technology comes back or has always been here somewhere. So it's interesting to see all that. So we're warned about being moral. We're warned about paying attention closely to prophecy, not dividing over it, but watching for everything, and then also watching our health. I mean, number one, if I do live to be 100 or 120, I don't want to be bedridden. I want to be healthy, and when I'm no longer healthy, I want to go home. So that's one thing that I'm after here. But to see all of that ingrained in the scrolls, it's like a community concept. This is when it gets bad, you best be doing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it's a really neat design, I think, for us to follow in the end times.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, and that's what's so exciting about the scrolls, because like you read it and it's like, wow, we're here. Like, time's getting really short. It is definitely time to get right with Jesus if you're not already. Well, I can't even. I wouldn't be able to think of a better place to end on. This has been such a fascinating conversation. Always is when you come on the show. Thank you so much for coming back on and talking with us about your new book.
Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. Anytime. And thank all of you for joining us yet again. Thank you for being members at Daily Renegade. We really appreciate you. And until next time, love you all. Take care and God bless. Hello and welcome to the Sharpening Report, and Happy New Year and Jubilee Day according to the Dead Sea Scroll calendar. That's right, Wednesday, March 19th is an important date, and if you have no idea what I'm talking about, don't worry, we're going to break it all down. Before we welcome our guest, if you haven't yet, please subscribe and hit the bell to turn on all notifications so you know when we post a new video. We are almost at 50,000 subscribers, and we really want to reach that milestone. So help us out, share this video around, tell people to subscribe. All that stuff would be great. All right, with that out of the way, let's welcome to the show our very good friend, Dr. Ken Johnson. Ken, how are you doing?
Doing good. How are you?
I'm doing great. Yeah, this is an exciting time because this for a lot of people really is a once in a lifetime kind of day
Yeah.
and an event, and it has to do with something that's called the Dead Sea Scroll calendars, which many of my regular subscribers probably know about. But when I go in my analytics, I find out on YouTube about half of the people watching are subscribers, and then half are not subscribed. So we get a lot of new people. So for those who may not be familiar with this, can you give us a rundown of what the Dead Sea Scroll calendar is and what sets it apart from other calendars?
Okay. Well, basically, the Dead Sea Scroll calendar is a calendar system talked about in the Dead Sea Scrolls. And we have our biblical calendar, like Nisan 14 is Passover and all that stuff. Same exact calendar, only according to the Dead Sea Scrolls, it's a solar calendar, not a lunar one. And what would happen, according to their prophecies, is that eventually Israel would switch to a lunar calendar, which is what they have now. Josephus, the church fathers, and a lot of other people mention the Essenes as being 100% accurate prophets. They have commentaries on the minor prophets, major prophets, and prophecies themselves, like when the Messiah would come, when he would die for our sins, things like that. So it's something very, very important, I think, that we look at. So if we take that as face value, basically, their concept is we have 6,000 years of human history and then a millennial reign. Same thing as what we have in the Bible, in Revelation. And the important parts are when you get to the last Jubilee period or 50-year period of each age. Basically, an age is 2,000 years, so there's 3 of them in our history. And they're talking about from the time of creation of the heavens and the earth to the creation of the new heavens and new earth. It's supposed to be 7,000 years. Their dates seem to be accurate. The prophecies seem to be very accurate. And so the idea is that in the last Jubilee period, you're going to have most of the prophecies we've been looking for fulfilled. And 2025 is the Jubilee year for the next to the last Jubilee. And so then after this, we have a 50-year period when most of those prophecies would be fulfilled. We've already seen the prophecies from the minor prophets start to be fulfilled. The takeover of the Gaza Strip permanently by Israel, and the expansion into Lebanon and the wars beginning with Iran. So those are mentioned in a lot of different Dead Sea Scrolls. But it's really interesting to see this whole 50-year period start. What's neat about it is you have these prophecies of each time Jubilee starts, that's the last one of an age. You've got a lot of prophecies that start, usually a major revival, a lot of good things as far as Gentile nations start in a Jubilee year. And then, and we already see that. We see basically Trump kind of taking over, redoing everything, not just for the United States, but if he's successful, most of the Western world will be greatly benefited by this, getting rid of globalists and things like that for a while. So it's just really interesting that all those things begin to take place.
Yeah, for sure. And, something that I know I got confused about this, and a lot of people have, is the difference between a Jubilee year and a Jubilee. And when I first started in this research, that tripped me up a little bit too, because I thought, okay, 2025 is the beginning of the next Jubilee, but it's not exactly the next Jubilee. It's the Jubilee year, and then 2026 would be. So can you explain the difference between like a Jubilee year and a Jubilee, where we're at and where we're headed?
Sure, according to the calendar, you have a year. Years always start the Wednesday closest to the spring equinox. So just figure spring equinox, spring, beginning of spring for the year. A group of 7 years is a Shemitah, and 7 Shemitahs is plus 1 year is a Jubilee period. It would be like us having 10 decades in a century. They would have 7 Shemitahs in a Jubilee, 2 Jubilees in a century, that kind of thing. And it's the same pattern. You have a 7-year pattern, which is the Shemitah. At the end of that, you have a Shemitah year, which is the last year of a set of 7, where special things happen. Debts are forgiven between Israelis, for instance. At the end of a Jubilee period, which is a 50-year period, you have a Jubilee year, and that is a time of debt being forgiven between Israelis, Gentiles, and a lot of other things happening. So yeah, it is a little confusing. I noticed in the scrolls they call a 50-year period an Ulma, and a
Oh,
Jubilee year a Jubilee. So I thought that was pretty interesting. But they still call a Shemitah year the last year of a Shemitah cycle. So
that is interesting, because that sounds really similar to a 500-year period, which is called an Ona, right? So a 50-year
mhm.
period is called an Oma with an M.
Ona with an N, yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay, yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting. So, how did ancient Jews observe the Jubilee year? What did they do on that day? The Jubilee year, not necessarily the 50-year Jubilee, but what we're in now, which is now the Jubilee year. How did ancient Jews observe the Jubilee year? What did they do on that day? And what would be the best way for Christians today to appreciate or even celebrate this day?
Basically, to look forward for what's going on, there's a great time to start witnessing if you're not already, for Christians. Basically, as far as the things that are going on there, for each one of these, like for a Shemitah year, a Jubilee year, and all the festivals, they have rituals. Most of us understand the Passover ritual very clearly shows the death, burial, and resurrection of the Messiah, who is the middle piece of the matzah in the matzah tov, representing a trinity. So you can see the God manifesting in the flesh, dying for our sins, giving us redemption, and a lot of other things in the ritual, if you just know Christian doctrine and you just look at the ritual. And we have a little bit of that from the Damascus covenant on the Pentecost ritual, which is pretty amazing. But for all the others, we really don't have anything written. There's some things written in the Talmud. They're not really super explicit. And at the same time, we don't know if they've changed or anything. So what we really need is somebody to find the other Dead Sea Scrolls, for instance, that would have all that detail in them.
Yeah, definitely. And hopefully we'll get some of those soon. I've heard you mention in one of your recent videos, because you recently did a video on the Jubilee year and everything. And I watched that with my kids. We watched the whole thing, the Q&A, all 2 hours of it. It was great. And in that video, you mentioned, and by the way, for the audience, go check out Dr. Ken Johnson on YouTube and check out that video. It's awesome. But I heard you mention in that video that 11Q13, one of these scrolls, says that the Jubilees are prophetic. Can you explain that scroll and what it says?
Yeah, that's probably my favorite Dead Sea Scroll.
Yeah.
It very clearly says that the Messiah is the Melchizedekian priest, as opposed to a Levitical priest, and you see that in Hebrews chapters like 7 to 10. But basically, it talks about the Messiah being God incarnate, coming to pay the penalty for our sin nature, and that event happening one Shemitah after the end of the 9th Jubilee of their Ona, which, if you translate that into a Gregorian calendar, is 32 AD. So they had the date right, the person right, the event right. It's pretty amazing. And there's a lot of other stuff in there too. There's even stuff talking about later on there'd be something like a rapture. But anyway, it's a really amazing scroll. But one of the things it says about it starts talking about the Jubilee and other things. The fact that a Jubilee is symbolic of other things. So the whole idea of every 50 years, all debts being forgiven points to the Messiah. It's symbolic of what the Messiah would do when he comes. And it very specifically says it's not talking about money, but it's the debt of our iniquity. So he pays for our sin and our iniquity. And it's just like the ritual of the or the law of Moses that is about the when if you accidentally kill someone, manslaughter, you go to a city of refuge. If you look real specific about that law, it's you go there and you await until the time that the death of the high priest, who was the official high priest at the time you committed the offense, and then you're allowed to go free. Well, if you think about it, that's not exactly fair. Say Josh kills somebody 20 years ago and he's been hiding out in a city for 20 years. I kill somebody today, so I go to the city tonight. Now, tomorrow the high priest dies, so we both get to go free. You spent 20 years, I spent 1 day. So that doesn't seem very fair per se. So the point is, it's not a moral law, it is a prophecy. So what could that be teaching then, if it's not just part of, evil people should be put to death, good people should be rewarded? And it's pretty obvious if you stop and think about it. We're all sinners of various kinds. Any sin is enough to send us to hell. We're all headed for hell when we're born because we inherit a sin nature. But when we have the death of our high priest, all sins are forgiven, period, instantly. And so all these things point to the Messiah. So it's really neat to see all those things and to see that's an example of one Dead Sea Scroll giving you several examples pointing back to Messiah.
And what an amazing thing to think about and appreciate and celebrate on this day. And that's a great example, because that's how it is with salvation for us. There are people that like me. I was raised in the church, so of course I had my own personal time where I accepted Jesus and everything, as we all do. But I was raised in it, so I always knew it. But there are people that live their whole lives in sin, and then on their deathbed they confess and they get to go to heaven too. And and we can like celebrate that. That's how forgiving our God is. And also, you mentioned another way to celebrate this day is to look forward to what might come. So I got to ask you, do you personally expect anything prophetic to happen this Jubilee year from now until this time, 2026? And if so, what do you think is going to happen? What are you thinking about?
Well, as far as me guessing, just knowing the scrolls, my guess would be nothing this year,
Mm-hmm.
but a lot of stuff starting in 26 and going forward. But the interesting thing about it is apparently I'm totally wrong, because for instance, there's one prophecy in one of the Dead Sea Scrolls that gives us a date. It says that Israel would mess up by messing up a covenant. It doesn't say which covenant, but that gets fixed in a 70-year period. The 70-year period is very close to the time of the tribulation. That's what the scroll says. It's actually a commentary on the prophet Jeremiah, which is pretty interesting. So your first thought is the 70-year prophecy that he's talking about, but it's really specific. And so the whole concept is they give away land. Once you take land that God has given you, once you've come back, you don't just give it back away. That's a breach of contract. And so when we look at this, starting in 1948 and going forward, the first breach of contract was the Sinai War in 1956. And they took the Sinai and the Gaza Strip because of a war. Once it was over, they gave the entire thing back. That's a breach of contract because Gaza should belong to Israel. So 70 years later, it's supposed to be fixed. That's in 2026. And the Gaza war started in 23, actually. So basically 3 years early. And my first thought when I read this is like, it fits, but there's no way the war would go on for 3 years. It's like, well, apparently it's going on for 3 years. And then again, with Trump in office saying, we've tried this so many times, let's just move all the Gazans out and we'll be done with it. That's a fulfillment of prophecy. Now, I don't know if that's actually going to take place, but the fact that he's talking about it, it's 25 now, and one more year, that's pretty interesting. So there's several things like that. And the prophecies talk about a lot of those things happening. One thing is really interesting, and I'll share this with you. Jesus talks about the budding of the fig tree.
Mm-hmm.
And when you see the fig tree bud, the generation that sees these things will not perish until they see everything fulfilled. Well, what's really interesting is in the Dead Sea Scrolls, the word for generation and the word for Jubilee is interchangeable.
Oh, wow.
So they do mean other things. I mean, a generation can be just whenever I was born to when my firstborn son is born. So 15 years to 50 years, who knows? Or, much, much more whenever I have my firstborn. So a generation means multiple things, but a Jubilee is a very specific 50-year period. And so what's interesting about that, everybody says, well, what is the budding of the fig tree? Is it Israel coming back in 1948? Is it them taking the temple in 67? Got to be one of the two. Well, we haven't actually seen it yet. And what's interesting, if you look at this, and in the Dead Sea Scrolls, the olive vine is Israel when they're messianic, which they are most of the time in history. When they're non-messianic, like they are now, they're called a fig tree.
Mm.
And so that's really interesting. So when Jesus came and they rejected him, he called them a fig tree. So in this case, you've got the budding of the fig tree we're talking about. So the planting of the fig tree was 1948. The growth of the fig tree when it took Israel, or it took Jerusalem rather, in the Temple Mount was 1967. When something buds and then it drops its fruit, then it starts creating a forest.
Mm.
So you can see an expansion. So the expansion, if it starts with Gaza and fulfills Zephaniah and Obadiah and the other prophecies by taking Gaza permanently, southern Lebanon, and then Gilead, and then the expansion begins, that would be the budding of the fig tree. Now, if this is connected with that prophecy from the Dead Sea Scrolls of 26, it all begins in 2026. 2026 is the very first year of the last Jubilee, or we could say the very first year of the last generation. So if that happens, then that generation will not pass until everything is fulfilled.
That is so interesting and exciting. So after this Jubilee year, we're going to be entering the next Jubilee, the final Jubilee in March of 2026. Now, why is this next Jubilee of 50 years so significant? And does it mirror anything from any other Jubilees from any other final Jubilees from any of the other ages?
Yeah, the scrolls teach that everything is cyclical. So in other words, the same kind of patterns happen. So at the end of each one of the ages, there's been three. The first age ended with a creation of an antichrist system with an antichrist person named Nimrod, with a false prophet named Enoch, and an entire tyrant system. And one guy, anointed of God, who's a type of Messiah, his name was Abraham, stood up and destroyed it. And this was at the end of the first age. So when we get to the end of the second age, you have a thoroughly corrupt system in Israel, and the Messiah and salvation comes, and the age of grace comes, and then the Romans come in and destroy it. At the end of this age, we're supposed to have a 7-year tribulation period, and the Messiah comes back and destroys it. One of the other things interesting in that, the very last, well, in the middle of the tribulation period is supposed to be the Antichrist desecrating the temple, right?
Mm-hmm.
At the end of the very last Shemitah of the age of Torah, we had the destruction of the Jerusalem temple. And then at the very end, the last Shemitah of the age of creation with Abraham, you had the fall and the destruction of the Tower of Babel.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just one example of not a direct prophecy, but a pattern. So at the end of every age, you see some sort of an Antichrist type system, really bad system being destroyed.
That's so interesting. And this stuff is absolutely fascinating to me. We should make mention of the actual calendar that we have. Can you tell us about your website, dsscalendar.org, and about the print calendar that we put together?
Yeah, basically when we finally figured out the calendar, and I did my research on it, but never could figure out the leap system. And then the guys at the University of Tel Aviv finally figured that out about 5 years ago. And so we created a website called dsscalendar.org. It's a PHP backend. So when you go to the calendar, it just takes your location and figures out how many hours from where you're at to Jerusalem, converts everything to Jerusalem time, and then takes the date of which you've visited it and just kind of builds the calendar. So you can go there, you can look at anything from 1900 to 2100. So to figure out the last 200 years, look up your birth date, other special things to see if there's any patterns. And we have teachings on each one of the 14 Ona, or 500-year periods, according to the prophecies. And we've tried to put in most of the dates, like when Abraham was born, stuff like that, when Israel was recreated. So we can go back and see patterns. So it's an interesting thing. And again, the next week from when we're doing this is the Jubilee year. And my Bible study group always meets on Tuesdays. We just have for a long time. So we have on the Tekufas, like the New Year's and everything, we have a potluck because it's part of the testament of, or actually the book of Jubilees. Noah commands all of us to observe those festivals. There's no rituals to be done. Basically, you're supposed to get together and see if anybody needs repentance, see if there's any prophecies recently fulfilled in the last 3 months, and then have a nice Thanksgiving type dinner, give thanks to the Lord and that kind of thing. And that's what we do. We also have, as part of that, Josh and I put together a print calendar. We're trying to find a way to make it a little less expensive, but nice wall calendar we can put up so you can see the Gregorian calendar and the Dead Sea Scroll calendar and try to figure out the patterns along with us.
Yeah, definitely. We've been doing that the past couple of years. People really enjoy those, and it's a great study tool. It's also a great gift. Just if you know somebody who loves prophecy, this is a great gift. But and you can pair it with Ken's books or my books. I've got a couple books on, and links to all of that is in the description below. If anybody wants to check that out. So do you think that we're going to find more scrolls soon that contain more prophecies?
Yes, actually, we know locations where there are things, probably scrolls. There are in Israel. But right now, the safest place for them is to remain exactly where they are because there's a war going on.
Right.
It's like there's always a war going on. But once this is cleared out and Judea and Samaria are declared to be Israeli territory, everything is disarmed, Gaza is not a problem anymore, then you're not going to have any question about who owns Dead Sea Scrolls, and everybody will be free to dig. Not everyone, but the Israelis will be free to very carefully dig and find things. So that's going on. We have Genizas in different places around the planet. In other words, a large place where you've got medieval manuscripts, one in Egypt, one in at least one in Spain, one in Russia, and a few other places that are going through. For instance, the one in Egypt, has approximately 40,000 manuscripts that they have not cataloged. They're going through carefully doing that. So when I wrote the book, Damascus Covenant, the New Covenant of Damascus, I had the Dead Sea Scroll, and you know how Dead Sea Scrolls are. There's holes everywhere. So you get through a couple of sentences, and it's like God said something to Moses, and there's a hole. So, but what was interesting is we found a medieval copy of the exact same manuscript in the Geniza, word perfect. So I was able to say, this word for sure means God said this to Moses. And so kind of filled the whole thing out. So those things are coming to light quite a bit. There's new Dead Scrolls coming to light every day. So a lot of interesting things going on.
Yeah, and that validates the Dead Sea Scrolls as well, because somebody might say, well, you know, if it's medieval, how do we know it wasn't faked? Well, because in medieval times they didn't have the Dead Sea Scrolls, so they wouldn't have known where the holes are to fake them. So if there was
Right.
anything wrong, you would find it in stuff that they did right. So that's really fascinating. So for people doing the math, and I get this a lot, I'm sure you get this a lot too. The end of the final Jubilee. So if it starts in March of 2026, the end of the final Jubilee should be in 2076, and that gives a lot of people anxiety. Does that mean that we have to wait until 2076 for the rapture or the return of Jesus or anything like that?
Yes. No, I'm just kidding. Possibly. I mean, the way that I would look at it is that it should be done at that point or before. And the thing that you need to look at to understand this is going back to the other two ages. So when God came to Abraham and gave him the covenant, the first time that he did this, he was 52 years old. It was exactly the year 2000 from creation. But the process, and by that time, 4 years prior to that, the Tower of Babel incident had happened, and everyone had been scattered into their 70 languages. But what happened is they quickly formed translation schools and tried to pull everything, the empire, back together, which they weren't quite successful. It was pulled together into 4 pieces. And you see the 4 kings in Genesis 18, I believe. One of course is Nimrod, Chedorlaomer, Arioch, and then Tidal, I believe. Anyway, the 4 guys. So they tried to come back and reform the empire, and that worked out good because Abraham and his people destroyed Chedorlaomer and his forces. The other 2 were somewhat godly nations after that part. And then it was basically 123 years after the end of the age that Nimrod was finally killed. The empire was completely broken up and everything went back to normal. So a period of about 170 years around the year 2000. So if you come up to the end of the age of Torah, Jesus is born in 2 BC, more or less, but basically 2 BC. He's 33 and a half when he dies. The day of his death, start of the church, the day of Pentecost is all around 32 AD. About 40 years later, you got the destruction of the temple. Then 3 years later, you've got the shutdown of the Essene temple. And then a couple of years later is the actual end of the age, which has the Council of Yavne. But still, it wasn't over because then skirmishes happen. And then finally in 135 AD, you have the Bar Kokhba rebellion and its destruction and the dissolution of Israel. So that whole process took approximately 138 years around that end. Now, I don't think that we could really go around it per se, like the second coming could be 20 or 30 or 40 years after the end, because if we have a finite system of 70 years, we have a millennial reign that can't really be pushed up or anything like that. However, it's very possible the Lord could come back, that we could have a 7-year tribulation period. The Lord could come back, fix everything, and then spend 10 or 20 years building the temple, in which case, when the temple is dedicated, that actually could be the year 2000. So it could be a lot of stuff, or the opposite. It could be 7 years and then the end of the age, which is the second coming of the Lord. But in either case, we know the season, we know the time period. And all of my friends want to say, well, I want to know the day. Well, how about the hour, second, and minute? You know, like the way the Jubilee calendar works and the way the scrolls work is that they narrow it down to a 50-year period most of the time. And then sometimes, if you're really specific, they'll narrow it down to a Shemitah. Something happens in the middle of a Shemitah or toward the end of a Shemitah or something like that. And really, that's good enough. If I was going to say, well, the rapture happens on Passover of this year. Well, there's a debate on when you do the Dead Sea Scroll leap week. So is it this Tuesday or next Tuesday? Well, to be perfectly honest, I don't care. I know it's coming. It's in that range. Now, it's not going to happen this year, but I'm just using that as an example. So it's really interesting to see all of those things.
Yeah, for sure. And I've speculated too about how that final 50 years could play out because, like you said, one possibility. I mean, Jesus did come early in the final Jubilee of the Torah age, just a few years after it started. It's possible he could come back early, and like you said, it might take 20, 30 years. I mean, Herod's temple took 40 years, I think, to build. So, and a lot of people have this idea that when Jesus comes back, he's basically going to snap his fingers and everything's going to be different. The temple will be there. And I don't think it's going to really happen like that. I think people are going to have to build the temple. I don't think it's going to be me and you because we're going to be in glorified bodies. And when you read through the end of the book of Ezekiel, these are human beings that are participating in, unglorified human beings, those that survived the tribulation and populate the millennium, that are participating in the temple activity. So it makes sense to me, and I'm speculating, but it makes sense to me that it's probably going to be humans that build the temple, probably under the direction of Jesus and all that. But that could take a while, and then, like you
Mhm.
said, once that's done, the cleansing of the temple or the dedication or whatever could coincide with the very start of the millennium. Another possibility could be because we have a rapture that we have no idea when that's going to happen. That could happen at any time. And one big misconception in Christianity, not so much in our circles because we're more prophecy focused, but just the church at large, who by and large really isn't focused on prophecy as much as we are. A lot of people think that the rapture is the thing that starts the tribulation, and it's not. It's
Right.
the covenant with the Antichrist, the covenant with many, with Israel and the Antichrist. So you could have the rapture happen really at any time. It could happen today, which would be great. And then you could
Mhm.
have years, and possibly even decades, before the tribulation actually starts, and all of this would fit perfectly well within that last 50 years. So do you think those are possible scenarios that could play out?
I think so. There's a lot of different things like that, but that's what I'm saying. I don't think it's going to be as far as like we're looking for the rapture.
Mhm.
So I don't think the rapture is going to be more than 50 years out,
Right.
55 or 60 or 70 or 100 or whatever. That would kind of mess up it's almost like us being raptured after the millennial reign starts. So I doubt that very seriously. Unless, of course, our calendar's off, which is probably unlikely, being that it told us exactly when the Messiah came the first time. So that's neat to have a calendar system and then 11Q13 pinpoint one event that we know very, very well, and give or take 2 or 3 years, because a lot of people say he died in 30 or 33 or 31, 32. This marks 32, but give or take a couple of years either way. Again, it's inside of a Shemitah, so that's cool. But yeah, there's a lot of possibilities on that. It could very easily be that the second coming is 2076, 7 years prior is the beginning of the tribulation period, and the rapture would still be sometime before.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah, so and I always want to make sure to remind people of that because again, I get comments sometimes from people who misunderstand what I'm saying or what you're saying, and they'll be like, "Oh, well, I'm in my 60s now. I'm not going to make it till 2076." I was really hoping to be able to see some stuff, and it's like, well, you still can because we don't know when the rapture is going to happen, and the Dead Sea Scrolls don't tell us, the calendar doesn't tell us. I want to make mention too that like Ken said, this calendar is so accurate, and it is very unlikely that we got it like totally wrong because it matches. This is the calendar the Bible uses, and I've tested this myself. I know you have too. Everything from Genesis to Revelation, even prophetically, it uses this specific calendar. So you can go into Revelation, and I've done this, and I've written books on it, and I know you have too, where you can go and try to figure out like the day counts of like, well, the two witnesses, have this amount of time in their ministry, and you can actually look at that. It doesn't give you an exact year, but you can actually look at that and actually see like during like what festival days happen and what occurs. And there's a whole bunch of day counts, but they all match perfectly on the Dead Sea Scroll calendar than all the past stuff, like, for example, the flood of Noah, or everything with Moses on the mountain. It gives you all these specific day counts of what happened, and when you look at those on the Dead Sea Scroll calendar, they fall on feast days and they fall on really important days. So it's so interesting to see that the Bible actually uses this calendar, and I don't. There's no other calendar that fits as well as that does. So that's really interesting. Well, but before we go, I want to. Where can people pick up your books, follow you online, and where can they watch your videos? You got three different things there. Give us all your links.
Okay. Well, BibleFacts.org, FACTS, not like a fax machine, is my website. And if you go there, it's got links for everything. But my books are for sale on Amazon. You can go to the website, click on it. It just takes you to an Amazon link. And then we broadcast live on YouTube on Monday nights with a live Q&A afterwards. That's how come we sometimes go a couple hours. But that's also linked on there. But you can also just look for Ken Johnson Bible Facts on YouTube, and that we should come up.
Fantastic. Well, this has been a great conversation. I'll leave the last word for you before we close off. What do you want people most to take away from this conversation, from this day that we're in, for what's coming in the future? What do you want most for people to take away from this?
For Christians, people that are already believers, I would say I would like you to pay attention to the scrolls, look at the prophecies that they give, the extra biblical ones, put them all together, understand that they don't contradict, they complement each other very well, so that we can understand what's coming, some of the good things and the bad. We can use those to begin to witness, which is what we're supposed to be doing. And for the Jewish people out there that are not Christian, not believers in the Messiah, when you look at the rabbis telling you Christianity's junk, don't pay any attention to it. And then you look at the Dead Sea Scrolls, which teach basic Christian doctrine. The Messiah did come in 32 AD. He did die for your sins. You can be reconciled to God, and he wants you in the family. And to see all these other prophecies like Gaza and everything at the right dates actually taking place. Israel being prophesied to come back, not just sometime, but in 1948, for instance. Those things are not coincidences, not all of them. They can't be. So God loves you and wants you to accept the Messiah. So pay very close attention to what your great grandfathers told you and not the medieval rabbis. Take a look at it for yourself. Don't go to a Catholic church or a Christian church, but just pick up the scrolls, pick up the Hebrew New Testament stuff. Just take a look at it. Decide for yourself. The Messianic movement is growing as prophesied by Paul in Romans chapter 11, and we live in some very exciting times.
Amen. I absolutely agree with all of that. Thank you so much for joining us again, Ken. We're going to have you back on again sometime soon. This has been a blast.
Thank you.
And thank all of you for joining us on this episode of The Sharpening Report. Until next time, love you all. Take care, and God bless. You know, if you are a Bible-believing Christian who opposes the kingdom of darkness trying to run the world right now, then you are a renegade to the satanic system. We here at Daily Renegade wear that badge proudly. So, if you're a renegade as well, head on over to dailyrenegade.com right now and get a membership today. You'll get our full catalog of Sharpening Report episodes and Daily Renegade update videos on topics such as Bible prophecy, science, technology, the Nephilim, aliens, and so much more. All of our episodes at dailyrenegade.com Renegade are early access, so as a member, you'll get the videos before anyone else does. Daily Renegade also offers videos not available anywhere else due to social media censorship. We also have a community page only for members where we can all fellowship together without fear of censorship. It's basically the best of Facebook and YouTube rolled into one without any of the garbage. Memberships are only $10 a month or $100 a year, and if you can do it, I suggest getting the $100 a year because it's cheaper in the long run, and essentially you get 2 months for free that way. So come join our family of renegades at dailyrenegade.com right now. The link is in the description below, and we'll see you there.